Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it had been 3 long weeks since the rather unfortunate incident at our cabin, otherwise known as Seal's Cove, which was one holiday cabin among 3 on one of the basins of Puget Sound on the Hood Canal, overlooking the same stretch of rather rocky beach. I truly thought my life was completely over, or at the very least, it would never ever be the same again. I mean, how could it be? It was when the most precious person in my entire life, my beloved daughter, had been taken from me so suddenly, even though after the extensive searching that was done by the police, 8 hours later, to my huge relief, against what seemed like insurmountable odds, she had been found safe and well, wandering around the place like a spaced-out zombie, barely even recognizing me as her own mother, and apparently having absolutely no recollection of what had happened to her. She had emerged from the woods covered in dirt with pieces of grass and leaves sticking out of her rather tangled honey-blonde hair. She had been covered with scratches from thorny briars all over her naked legs and arms. She'd only been wearing shorts and a t-shirt at the time. I remember the unbridled, unparalleled joy, an overwhelming sense of relief, when I held her in my arms again. I had reconciled myself to the horrifying reality that I might never see my daughter again. Everyone knew when a teenager was abducted, it was always nefarious, and it was unlikely to lead to a positive outcome. I had watched enough crime documentaries on television to know that this was often the case, so I had prepared myself for the very worst news that no mother would ever wish to hear. I was naturally very afraid that my daughter Myrtle had been violently raped or murdered by some pervert who fancied young teenage girls, and after he had used her for his sick purposes to fulfill his warped fantasies, he would lightly discard her like an old packet of chips lying on the sidewalk for anyone to tread over. Such a deranged person would fail to realize the devastated trail of shattered hearts he would invariably leave in his wake, as psychopaths like that have no concept what they do to people when they bulldoze their lives with their callous, ill-considered acts. Ostensibly, if a victim like my daughter is left alive after such a violent attack, will that person ever be the same again? Are they not permanently damaged and broken for having been so violently abused? I think so. So when I saw my beloved daughter again, I did not want to let her go. For even though she was only 16 years old at the time, to me, no matter how old my daughter would become, she would always unquestioningly remain my beloved, most treasured little girl, and be like Peter Pan in my eyes, for to me she would never, ever grow up. When my daughter was vindictively abducted by a person unknown, that 8-hour stretch might have been a short time to a lot of people, but I assure you, every single excruciating second of her disappearance may as well have been an entire lifetime to me. The hours had stretched before me like a bottomless pit, where there seemed to be no end in sight. So many parents who find themselves caught up in my unfortunate predicament, rather like checkmate on a chessboard. They know that things will never ever be the same again, and they live with a very real fear that they may never be reunited with their child. These hellishly unbearable thoughts had brought me close to a mental breakdown. Prior to my daughter's fortuitous abduction, I had naively wallowed in the delusional belief that bad things only ever happened to other people, but not to me, nor to my little girl. These were the stories I heard on the news, where a little voice in my head would say, "Thank God that's not me," until one day my worst fears were played out, rather like a script in a movie. In truth, you feel as if you've been dragged, kicking and screaming, into a psychological thriller of which you want to play no part, like an actor who hates the script and flings it back at the producer indignantly and storms out of the studio saying, "I'm not playing this part, not over my own dead body." Unfortunately, sometimes the script rolls out, and whether you like it or not, and whether you've agreed to accept the part or not, you have to play it regardless. It's like being flung into a game of Jumanji and having no idea what the ultimate outcome of the game will be, but you have to play it regardless. In truth, all I wanted to do was to curl up into a fetal position, blocking out the entire world and pretending that none of this had ever transpired, because real life can be tortuously cruel. My beloved family cabin, Seal's Cove, a name given to the place by my grandfather, had suddenly lost its alluring gloss all over one weekend. It was almost as if it had been badly contaminated by that foul, rancid stench of one of the odious, worst days of my life on record, apart from, of course, the day when the police arrived at my front door, when my daughter was only 5 years old at the time, to announce to me that my husband had been fortuitously killed while out riding his bicycle down the street, in our leafy green, very quiet Seattle suburb, by what can only be described as a nonchalant, irresponsible driver, who, according to witnesses at the time, did not appear to be looking where he was going, and was so caught up on his cell phone talking to a business client of his on Labor Day weekend of all things, when, by all accounts, there was barely a soul out and about. That simple call had cost my husband his life, robbing and depriving my daughter of ever getting to know her father. I resented the driver for driving without due attention and caution for many years, until one day I chose to forgive him. I just couldn't go on living with the accumulative resentment inside me, because it would have made me a very bitter woman. It had been a tough, very arduous time in my life, but I had a daughter to raise, and couldn't wallow in my own grief. I had to get on with being a mother, and that is invariably what I did. My late husband Jonathan would not have expected less of me, and I wasn't going to let him down in any way, shape or form, and I would make him proud of me. If I did anything well in this life, I was going to raise my daughter to be a full-rounded, upstanding citizen. That's all any parent can do, for we all want the very best for our children. But the harrowing truth of it all is that we can't watch our children 24/7, even though we would love to have eyes in the back of our head, if we so could. Ostensibly, after everything that had transpired that harrowing, inauspicious day when my daughter was fortuitously abducted, I felt as if I'd been mown down by a forklift truck on the highway, and was trying to pick up the pieces of my life to make sense of everything. I still didn't have answers, as even though my daughter had returned to me safe and well, although, like anyone who's been through a traumatic ordeal, she was naturally flustered from the experience. I desperately wanted answers. I really needed to know how and why she was abducted in the very first place. The enigmatic questions rolled in tirelessly, like the unceasing ocean waves that gallop across the shoreline in an effortless, smooth rhythm. I was thankful my daughter had not been raped, as that is every parent's worst nightmare. I was grateful for small mercies, but why had she been snatched away like that? For what purpose? To what end? I wondered if a deranged stalker had been watching her surreptitiously and following her around, like one of those besotted celebrity fans who attach themselves to people in the spotlight as they feel some kind of close affiliation to someone they barely know. Let's not kid, there's some weird people running around the place that probably should be on medication. In my day, many of these people were placed in mental facilities, which incidentally I don't like at all. But in the same breath, I certainly do not like the thought of unmedicated people with serious mental health conditions, potentially being dangerous, being able to wander around freely. People who are capable of doing anything, especially if they're hearing voices in their heads telling them to do these obscene things. The very thought of it gives me the chills. My daughter claimed to have no memory of her abductor, so she couldn't even give a police artist a description of what he'd actually looked like. This was bitterly disappointing to me, because if a picture had been drawn of the young man responsible for abducting her, maybe someone local might know who he was, and hopefully draw the police closer to finding him and making an arrest. I'm afraid to say my daughter was not forthcoming about anything, and conveniently claimed to have no memory of the event at all. Indeed, she seemed to just clam up, like an oyster in its shell. The police believed her claims of amnesia, because I think it suited them to do so. As with no new leads, you can forget about a case and move on to another one, can't you? Indeed, some might say it's not a case at all that is deserving of any scrutiny or investigation, as my daughter returned to me unharmed, safe and well. But that's not the point. I disagree on that, as someone had abducted her, and the question was who, and more to the point, why. I remember the police officer told me very politely that they had no new leads and no DNA evidence was recovered on my daughter's clothing to give us any insight as to who her abductor might have been. Not even a stray hair from his scalp was found on her clothing, although they did find some red fibres on my daughter's clothes that probably came from the abductor's T-shirt that he'd been wearing at the time. But it was the kind of fibre seen commonly in regular T-shirts that could have been worn by 80% of our population. Sometimes we have to accept that in life, ma'am, answers may not always be found, he had told me, pulling a sympathetic face. He continued to remind me of all the 411 cases out there, and said, Mrs. Cladderstone, you're one of the lucky ones. You can take that from me. Your daughter could be one of those missing 411 cases you hear about. But thankfully she's not. We were looking for her for 8 hours at a stretch, and then she was found. That is an excellent, excellent result. One that we could never have anticipated. Sometimes people are never found, and searches can continue for days on end, with no answers ever recovered. I think we should thank our lucky stars she was recovered safe and well. Be patient with her, Mrs. Cladderstone. She was abducted, she's in shock, and is still traumatized after the event. But, officer, she's all dithery. It's like she's not all there. Give her time, as I was saying, Mrs. Cladderstone. Be patient with your daughter. Give her some tea, something to drink, preferably something sweet. She needs a good bath and plenty of rest. If she does remember anything about her abductor, feel free to bring her to the station at your leisure. In the meantime, it would do you and your daughter no harm to both see a counsellor together. The officer gave me a card with the name of a trauma counsellor on it and said, This is the woman we highly recommend. We use her at the station. She's very, very good with victims of trauma. I think she will help you and your daughter overcome this hurdle in your lives that has thrown you a curveball. It's funny, but despite the fact that I had my daughter home safe and well, I didn't feel remotely lucky. I felt as if someone had thrown a hand grenade at my life. Furthermore, if the truth be told, deep down in the heart of my gut, I didn't believe for a single second my daughter had no memory of the event. I intuitively was sure that she was hiding something from me, something that she was clandestinely refusing to share with anybody. I didn't like the thought of my daughter keeping a secret from me. Let's just say a mother always knows when her daughter is being economical with the truth. And there was definitely something a little shifty in my daughter's demeanour that made me almost certain that there were things she was keeping from me, things she didn't want me to know about, that made my antennae begin to wag rather vigorously, like a dog's tail. I longed for my daughter to talk to me, to tell me what had really happened that morning, but my daughter could be like a closed book at the very best of times, and she would look at me with a blank face and say, I can't remember anything, Mum. Believe me, it's much better that way. I don't see how you can say that, Myrtle. You forget. I witnessed the young man abduct you with my very own eyes. He threw you over his shoulders as if you were a sack of potatoes and ran with you on his back. You have no idea, love, no idea at all, what that did to me. I thought I'd never see you again. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a mother, helplessly watching your daughter being snatched away from you like that? You were screaming, and when you cried out, it was like a knife piercing through my guts. I can't believe you don't remember a thing. Surely there must be something you can recall about the man. He needs to be thrown into a prison cell. But the police are no closer to making an arrest. The officer says your case has completely befuddled him, and we don't know if your abductor let you go or whether you successfully escaped him. It so would help if you could remember something, love. Please try and think. My daughter frowned, rolling her eyes in the back of her head. Mum, must we go over this again? I was abducted. Big deal. It's over now. I'm safe. Isn't that what matters? I was not harmed, nor was I raped. I don't want to think about what happened to me, but you keep harping on about it. I really don't want to be reminded of any of it. Can't we just let this go? I told you, I can't remember a thing. I appreciate, sweetheart, that you don't want to talk about any of this. That's perfectly understandable and completely natural. But if you can try to remember what your abductor looked like, it would give the police a flying start in the case. And it might get closer for us to be able to successfully make an arrest. In true belligerent teenage style, my daughter waved her hand in front of her face, as if she was squatting me away like an annoying fly. Mum, she snapped, get over yourself. I'm fine, aren't I? Isn't that what matters? I very much doubt the person that abducted me is going to show his face around here any time soon. And I keep telling you, I don't remember him or anything that happened to me. Nor do I want to remember. So can't we please change the subject? I sighed in exasperation, as I knew very well that trying to suck blood out of a stone was pretty much useless, and I was not going to get any further information out of my daughter, so I might as well quit while I was ahead. As a consequence of the events that transpired that had sucked the very life out of bone, marrow, and sinew, I was now stuck in my home in Seattle with my daughter. To be fair to Myrtle, she always was devotedly at my side, attending to my every need. But as far as being a mother was concerned, and attending to hers, I was pretty useless. In truth, I should be looking after her, not the other way round. But my daughter Myrtle seemed to have bounced back from her bizarre experience better than I'd expected, with the incredulous, buoyant resiliency of a beach ball. She had rekindled the flame with her ex-boyfriend Neville. Things were going swimmingly well for her. She and her boyfriend were stronger after the breakup than ever before. But then I guess trauma can either tear you apart or drive you closer together. In the beginning, my daughter had pulled away from Neville's possessiveness, claiming to me that sometimes she felt she couldn't breathe in that insufferable relationship, as he never let her out of his sight. Now she could only embrace the boy she had rejected, as if his loving arms offered her solace and assurance from the big bad world. I guess she needed that kind of reassurance and stability in her young life, so she'd naturally turned to Neville for comfort, and who could blame her for that? So my daughter was doing remarkably well, and was insistent that the trauma therapy she was receiving was completely futile, because she was healing on her own. If I'd been wearing her shoes, I'd have probably done much the same. Let's not kid, Neville had been good for her. He had been a stable rock for her, assuring her that he'd take care of her so that nothing like that would ever happen to her again. How can anyone confidently promise someone something like that? Because one thing I've learnt about life is there are no guarantees at all. In truth, I was happy that Myrtle had someone to talk to about everything. Even though my late husband Jonathan was no longer around, and was long since dead, I missed him more than ever before. I would love to have had his large shoulder to cry on, especially after facing such a debilitating, dreadful scare like this, that had left me feeling vacuously empty and completely helpless. It was tough always trying to be the strong one in the family, when you felt the world crumbling beneath you, like a house built out of grass that might easily blow away if the winds became boisterous enough. I was still trying to grievously recover from the aftershocks of my daughter's abduction, as if my physical body had gone through a cyclone itself, and as a consequence was battered and blue from the jarring experience, even though I was the one that was not abducted. But I might as well have been, because everything my daughter had been through, I'd experienced twice over in my own imagination. And sometimes the roller coaster rides your fertile mind can take you on when you are worrying are enough to turn your hair grey overnight. I was emotionally spent, extremely fatigued. I was trying my level best to get my act together, to grow a pair, but it was easier said than done. I'm not sure that the trauma counselling was actually helping, nor was the doctor who had prescribed me some antidepressants, but they too did not appear to be working. My trauma counsellor, who did home visits, I'm thankful to say, was eagerly urging me to take small steps a little at a time, to go for a walk in the neighbourhood, for example, get some fresh air, exercise and sunshine. But I could not bring myself to get out of the house at all. I had become a shadow of my former self, like a hermit crab tucked away tightly in its little shell, reluctant to ever come out again. Likewise, I was afraid of any predator lurking in my midst, waiting in the tenebrific shadows to tear me and my daughter apart. I wondered, could I trust anyone anymore? Could I trust anyone ever again? My daughter's abductor was still out there somewhere. Was he watching us? Maybe he was laughing at us and at the police for being unsuccessful in making a conviction, for he had outsmarted us all. My daughter's abductor had not managed to keep Myrtle for reasons I couldn't comprehend. By all accounts, the world had suddenly become a very predatory place for me, and it was as if me and my daughter had become all but prey. I had to keep looking over my shoulders again and again, like a frightened rabbit, always watching out for a stalking fox on the prowl. I realized I was feeling nakedly vulnerable and insecure like this, because all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, the world I thought I knew to be a safe and secure one had become all topsy-turvy, and had been callously hijacked by the cruel realization that life is not always a bowl of cherries, and that bad things can happen to good people, people that are as innocent and naive as my daughter. I know that the world is not a fair place, but whoever said it was? It is really like playing a game of Russian roulette. You're never going to know the long-term result of anything. Some of us get lucky in our lives, others less so. I do know this to be true. I have friends whose lives appear to go by so perfectly smoothly. Nothing untoward ever happens to them, while some people I know don't have it good at all. They have sledgehammers thrown into their lives, with one bad thing happening after another. And yet I will say this about them. These stoic individuals have risen above their storms like heroes, and I have huge admiration for their courage. I need to follow in their example and allow their stories to inspire me. Let's just say the events of that unfortunate day when Myrtle was taken from me still kept replaying in my mind over and over again like a broken record that I wanted to pull out of the mains power supply because it was playing the same damn ominous tune over and over again. At night I'd wake up from my nightmares, drenched in a furious sweat, where I'd have heart palpitations and panic attacks. It was too dreadful for words. This had to stop. When the police questioned me that day, they kept saying, "Ma'am, please tell us everything you remember. What did the perpetrator look like? Did you see him clearly?" I remember privately wanting to throttle the police officer and shake him so hard. "Find my girl!" I wanted to scream into his ears. "Find my girl, for God's sake! Don't just sit there like a great big buffoon! Do something!" The officer had looked at me through his kind grey eyes and began to make notes with a chewed-up pen into a little black book that he carried on his person. He had chewed the life out of the back of his biro pen. It was probably a nervous habit that he lightly procured from dealing with overwrought people, much like myself on the job. "Why are you not looking for my daughter?" I was screaming at him in my mind. If you sit here making ridiculous notes, that perpetrator could be long gone by now. I'm better looking for my daughter myself than relying on the police to help me out. I locked my hands together tightly and said very curtly, I told you, officer. It happened very quickly. I can't remember details. Everything is very vague. My daughter's abductor was wearing a red T-shirt. I do know that. He was young, with mousy brown hair, probably in his late teens to early 20s. I can't be sure because I'm never very good with age. Besides, it was difficult to see because I was seeing him from a distance. He was well built, but I could only see his back view. He went up to my daughter very casually to engage in conversation with her. I imagine he was asking her something. I've no idea what they were talking about, but the banter between them appeared good, light-hearted and friendly. Well, it seemed like that at the time. My daughter smiled at him very warmly. They talked for a second, and then he just grabbed her, ran off with her. She was screaming so loudly, officer, kicking her legs up and desperately trying to free herself from his grasp. But he had so much brawn on him. She didn't stand a chance. I tried to give her chase, officer, from the patio where I was sitting, but I was wearing flip-flops. So when I ran after her, I slipped out of them and fell. My feet discharged themselves from my flops, and I twisted my ankle. I couldn't get desperately far. I was in agonizing pain. But I will tell you this, officer, the young man seemed to be some kind of athlete because he could run pretty well. My daughter was light, but he was a strapping man, so she didn't stand a chance against him. At the time, I abandoned any self-conscious feelings of embarrassment and began to cry with tears pouring down my cheeks, that I wiped away with the back of my hand. Whatever my daughter was, I knew she needed me. The last thing I needed to do was to blubber like a baby in front of these kind officers, who would undoubtedly console me with tissues and yet more nauseating sweet tea. I knew my emotional outbursts would only serve to delay the investigation, prolong the agony, and of course the search for my precious little girl. Finding my daughter and her perpetrator was of paramount importance. Everything else could wait. My tears could be put on the back burner until there really was something to cry about. My daughter was still probably alive, probably even fighting for her life. So while this was the case, there was still hope, a beacon of light that was burning brightly, that I hoped would never ever go out. I know this is very distressing for you, Mrs. Cladderstone. Very, very upsetting, said the female officer sympathetically, handing me a box of tissues. You have my deepest sympathy, you really do. I took a tissue from her gratefully, blowing my nose very hard into a tissue and wiping my red puffy eyes. She continued, I can't imagine what you must be going through, Mrs. Cladderstone. I really can't. Do you have any children, officer? I asked her rather bluntly, already assuming her likely answer, for she looked way too young to have children. My guess she was probably between 23 to 25 years old, fresh-faced and bright-looking, with wide, innocent hazel eyes that still had a lot of learning to be done. But working for the police and experiencing some of these cases would soon surely wipe the dewy zest away from her eyes. The young officer flushed, her face growing bright pink. She shook her long mane of brown hair that was tied up in a neat no-nonsense ponytail and said, No, I don't. Well, there you go, then, I said rather brusquely. How can you possibly know how I feel? Myrtle is my only daughter. She's all I've got. Her father died when she was only 5 years old. Can you imagine that? I don't know how I'm going to cope without her. The thought is just too dreadful, too inconceivable for words. You have to find my girl. You need to be out there combing the woods looking for her, not sitting here asking me questions like this. That's why, Mrs. Cladderstone, said the female officer, reaching over to me to squeeze my arm encouragingly. We need to focus on finding your daughter, so she returns home safe and sound to you. That's the whole point. That's why we need to ask you all these questions. Are you going to focus on finding her? Are you really? I asked. Why do I not believe that? I'm struggling to believe that. You people are quick to make promises, but I wonder, Do you deliver on them? I've listened to statistics, you know. They say out of 100% of crimes, sometimes 80% are not solved. I watch the news often enough. How murderers and rapists always get away with their insidious crimes and are never found. If the police did their jobs properly, there'd be greater arrests, would they not? And some of these evil, insidious people would be locked behind bars, never permitted to see the light of day ever again. While that may be true, Mrs. Cladderstone, rest assured, the Mason County Sheriff's Office takes abduction cases very seriously, which is why we need to ask you all these awkward questions. Tell us from the very beginning, Mrs. Cladderstone, everything that happened. What your daughter was wearing, what she was doing at the time that she was abducted. Think about these things very attentively, Mrs. Cladderstone, and don't overlook anything, because sometimes, believe me, the smallest tidbit of information can give us details and insight that can lead to an arrest and the safe recovery of your daughter. So we do need to go through all the details of your daughter's disappearance with a fine tooth comb. Do you understand where I'm going with this? But I told you, officer. I've told you everything I know. Me and my daughter Myrtle come here to stay at the cabin over the long weekends quite regularly, from Seattle for a break. The trip isn't too bad, you see. The cabin belonged to my grandparents. And me and my daughter just come here all the time because we love it so much. We've never had any trouble. Until now, of course. I can see why you love coming here, said the female officer, who was sitting next to the male officer on the couch, and I was sitting in the chair only a hair's breadth away from her. It's so beautiful here. It's idyllic. What's not to like about this place, with the woods and the stunning views over the canal, and those very dramatic rocks? They're a delight to behold. I'd live here myself if I could afford a place like this. Tell me, Mrs. Cladderstone, how old is your daughter? The male officer asked. He spoke with authority, but also with extreme kindness. My daughter is 16 years old. Of course, at that age, she thinks she's incredibly mature. She thinks she's sophisticated and all that. But the reality is she's very young, very callow, very impressionable. So I worry about her. It's too dreadful to words to think that this man has abducted her, taken her to God knows where. And what is he doing to her, officer? That's the big question. Is there anyone you know, Mrs. Cladderstone? Anyone at all, even in your family members perhaps, that would wish to harm your daughter? I need you to think about this very carefully, he asked gently. Has your daughter done anything to upset anyone, perhaps? A girlfriend or boyfriend, perhaps, provoked anyone to jealousy? You see, ma'am, with all the social media these days, teenagers can get caught up in a lot of stuff. Oh, no, nothing like that. My daughter is a desperately sweet person, officer. Well, maybe not to me. You know, she's a tumultuous teenager, belligerent and all that when it comes to me. But to everybody else, she's perfectly lovely. She hasn't got a bad bone in her body. No one would ever wish to hurt her. Everybody loves my girl. But what about boyfriends, Mrs. Cladderstone? Is your daughter in a relationship with anyone at the moment? Not any more. She broke up with her boyfriend a week before, you see. We came to the cabin, and that was the reason why we came, actually. I suggested we came here because she was very upset. I knew it would do my daughter a great deal of good, help her to get away from her guilt, so to speak. I think even though she wanted to break up with Neville Mayers for quite a while now, she was rather reluctant and hesitant to do so. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, you see. So she was grievously upset about making him upset, if you know what I mean. A bit of a vicious cycle, you could say. Myrtle is a very sensitive soul, you know, officer. She gets dreadfully upset even if I kill a fly on the mantel. Those things are very nasty. But my daughter sees good in everything and in everyone. By all accounts, Neville didn't take the break-up terribly well. He's extremely besotted over my daughter. Leaving him was the best decision she ever made, as far as I'm concerned. Why do you say that, ma'am? Well, you know, officer, he's terribly possessive towards her, which made me distinctly uncomfortable, as it did her. My daughter does not need an intense relationship at such a young age. She should enjoy being young, footloose, and fancy-free, shouldn't she? She doesn't need to be tied down to a serious relationship at her young age. Well, would you believe it, I actually happened to bump into Neville's father at the local Walmart about 3 weeks ago. Do you know what he said to me, officer? He said, "I don't attend my son's weddings, I'm afraid. My ex-wife would never let me attend. So when my Neville marries your daughter, you will know why I'm not there. I'm afraid me and the ex, there's a rather turbulent, rough history between the two of us. We don't get on at all. We can't even be in the same room together without everything combusting, if you know what I mean. So please don't be greatly offended when I don't attend your daughter's wedding." "He said that to you?" said the male officer, looking distinctly curious. "That's pretty heavy. Your daughter's only 16. "Well, of course. I mean, she thinks she's so mature, doesn't she? She thinks she's sophisticated and stuff like that. But she is still a little girl as far as I'm concerned, who's got a lot of growing up to do. It freaked me out, let me tell you, to hear, Neville's father talking like this. My daughter's still a child. The last thing she needs is to concern herself with getting married. So that conversation greatly troubled me. I can imagine it did, ma'am." My conversation with the male officer appeared to have piqued the female officer's attention. She leaned forward to study me closer. "Tell us all about Neville Myers, Mrs. Cladderstone. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about him. From the sounds of things, based on what the father told you, that young man is very, very serious about your daughter. And as you say, your daughter is still very young. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a bit of a red flag, having her boyfriend that fixated over her." "Well, it is a red flag. That's exactly how I see it, officer. It concerned me greatly. Of course, don't ask me very much about him, because I can't give you much insight into him. Because my daughter is very secretive about him, as girls her age so often are when it comes to their boyfriend. I have met the father a couple of times because he came around to the house with his son. That's why I recognized him at the Walmart." "Oh, I see. So that's why you recognized him," said the male officer, making a hurried note in his notepad. "Do you know the father's name by any chance, Mrs. Cladderstone?" "Yes, his name is Simon. I will say father and son are carbon copies of each other. Neville is a very good-looking young man. Doubtless he could have his pick of the girls if he wished. You know the type, sporty, extremely clever, great grades, and doubtlessly a promising future ahead of him. Neville's well-built, dark hair, green eyes, so he's everything a teenage girl would swoon over, if you know what I mean." The female officer nodded. "Please go on, Mrs. Cladderstone," she encouraged. "You were saying—" "Well, I was saying that I knew that Neville was smitten by my daughter. It was blindingly obvious. But after I bumped into his father in Walmart, I think I realized the level of how serious he was about her. I knew when I saw them together, Neville was looking at my daughter like she was Cinderella, if you know what I mean, putting her on a pedestal for sure. And that is a disaster waiting to happen, because no one can ever live up to those perfect expectations. My daughter's a very pretty girl," I said, thrusting my cell phone into the officer's hand, so that he could examine my daughter's picture more closely. The photograph easily showed off her long honey-blonde hair, her high cheekbones and very blue eyes that in certain lights almost looked like pools of turquoise. The male officer handed my cell phone to the female, who took a picture of the photograph with her own cell phone, and then promptly returned my cell phone back to me. "She's very pretty," she said, giving me an approving nod. "I'm taking a copy of this photograph if you don't mind, so everyone can be informed of what your daughter looks like. It'll be very helpful for us." "As you can see from the photograph, officer, Myrtle's always had boys swooning all over her, like bees around a honey pot. It might actually be hard for you to believe," I said matter-of-factly, "but I was rather like her at her age, had exactly the same problems myself. I've warned her not to get serious about anyone at this stage of her life. But Myrtle's, she's got all the time in the world, hasn't she? to enjoy herself before she finally settles down to be a mother and wife one day. Girls her age, officer, I do hate to say this to you, but they never ever listen. They always stubbornly do what they want to do. In my learned experience, teenagers have minds all of their own. So when my daughter got involved with Neville, she went into the relationship with all guns blazing, you could say. What exactly does that mean, Mrs. Cladderstone? All guns blazing. It's an interesting terminology for you to use. Well, you know, like many young girls her age, my daughter was a little boy mad. They all are. She very much fancied Neville Myers. Had her eyes on him for a very long time, she did. I think teenagers, both girls and boys, are extremely visual. So when it comes to dating, someone's looks invariably play an intrinsic role, which of course is terribly shallow. But when you're young, looks seem to be so important. That's why these kids go ballistic on Instagram, flaunting themselves in front of the camera. I think the first time Neville took my daughter out, she was completely over the moon about him. And of course her girlfriends were all green at the gills with envy. But after 6 months of dating him, with him becoming all serious and extremely intense towards her, I think the shine was beginning to wear off their relationship, officer. My daughter was becoming increasingly subdued and less excited about seeing the young man, which became profoundly noticeable to me, especially when she chose to stay in with me on a Friday night to watch movies and order pizza. She's never done something like that before. So the breakup in the relationship was a long time in coming. She told me she felt completely suffocated by the man. I had noticed that the police officers were beginning to exchange private glances between each other, when I told them that I had boys flocking around me once. But it was true, I did. They probably found it impossible to believe that. But let's just say age had not been kind to me. I had myself to blame for that, of course. Back in my day, I'd lie back on the beach indiscriminately, lapping up the sun like a salamander, and soaking myself in a tropical tanning oil that smelt of coconut to maximize the benefits of my tan. At the time, I had no way of knowing that I was setting up my skin for serious, irreparable sun damage. And if you had told me back then what I was doing to myself, and how it would affect my long-term appearance in the future, I would have obstinately refused to listen to any well-meaning advice that you might have offered me. Why? Because I knew better, of course. Back in my day, I was interested in living in the moment. The future held very little concern or interest to me, as the future was such a long way off in the distance. It seemed like a lifetime away. Kids in my daughter's generation are a lot more savvy about that kind of thing now. Some kids are already taking precautionary measures to ward off the aging process. Of course, I acquired the perfect golden tan back in my day, which was the envy of so many of my girlfriends. It came at one hell of a cost, as premature aging turned my perfect glowing complexion into a leather hide that would rival a rhinoceros. As a result, my youthful gloss was stolen from me, and by the time I was 30, I looked as if I was in my late 40s, and I don't say that at all proudly. I remember when someone asked me if I wanted a pensioner's discount at the store because it was Thursday, and pensioners got discounts on Thursday. The teller tells me this, when at the time I was 35 years old. As you can imagine, I was utterly mortified. I went back home and cried my heart out, wondering why everybody thought I was so much older than my real biological age. I mean, the teller must have thought I was in my bloody 70s. My daughter Myrtle had come into the room to comfort me, and bless her cotton socks, she told me I didn't look a day over 25. And although she was lying through her teeth to make me feel a lot better about myself, her kind, reassuring words brought me a large measure of comfort, as Myrtle has always been a gentle soul like that. I couldn't have asked for a nicer, more considerate daughter, even though, of course, she did have that typical teenager propensity to a rebellious spirit. I expect my physical appearance also rapidly declined after my daughter's father, the quintessential love of my life, who I'd been married to for over 8 years, was knocked over on a bicycle by a passing car, and was killed at the scene. I never did overcome or get over his untimely passing. I lost so much weight all over my body at the time, which I never regained, despite my very best efforts to do so. It would seem the pinched, gaunt look, never seemed to leave my face, which only made me look significantly older. They do say if you've had a hard life, you can wear it on your face like another layer of clothing, and I expect that was true in my case. I never did remarry again, so it was me and my daughter against the world, and I liked it that way. Now here I was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea in my hand. More tea was spilling on my plush carpet than actually remained in my cup, as my fingers were trembling so much with my shattered nerves all over the place, as I envisaged the dreadful prospect of a life spent without my daughter. The tea the officer presented me was so nauseatingly sweet, I was convinced that she must have tipped the whole sugar bowl into the cup. The two officers were asking me so many questions, many that I just couldn't answer. My mind was in such a dithering tiz. Could they not see I was in a dreadful state? For goodness sake, I'd had a horrible, horrible shock, and they were throwing questions at me like darts on a dartboard, with no end in sight. I wanted them to be out there, looking for my daughter's abductor, trying to find my daughter. What if she could never be found again? Why were they asking me all these questions? And what did my daughter's ex-boyfriend Neville have to do with anything? He was a nice enough chap. The police seemed interested in learning all about him. Why did they insist in looking in all the wrong places for their answers? As if reading my thoughts, the female officer said reassuringly, "Don't worry, Mrs. Cladderstone. We've got some police already out there searching the woodgrove for your daughter, where you last saw the perpetrator when he took flight through the woods. In our experience, Mrs. Cladderstone, when an abduction like this happens, very often the person responsible may actually be known to the victim. Of course, this isn't always the case that the victim knows the perpetrator in a crime, but of course we need to pursue all options. We can't rule anything out. The fact that your daughter's boyfriend Neville was very possessive over your daughter, and his own father was talking about his wedding to your daughter one day, is sounding alarm bells to me. It could, of course, be extremely innocent, but that is what we're going to have to find out. Your daughter broke up with Neville a week ago, and now she goes missing. The two may not be connected, but at the Sheriff's County office we don't take coincidences lightly. I'm in no doubt it's going to have been very hard on Neville Mayers that your daughter broke up with him when he was so serious about her. We need to question him at the earliest opportunity. In order for us to connect the dots, Mrs. Cladderstone, we do have to ask questions. I know it's annoying, but it does help us build a picture of what may have happened to your daughter, and if she may have known her abductor or not. Do you think, Mrs. Cladderstone, that Neville could be behind your daughter's abduction in any way?" "Of course Neville's not behind my daughter's abduction, officer. Honestly, the idea's absolutely ludicrous. You're both barking up the wrong tree there. You've got the wrong impression of Neville. And you forget that I did actually witness the person that whisked my daughter away on his shoulders, and it certainly was not Neville that I saw. Neville may be many things, officers, but he'd never abduct my daughter, I can assure you of that. He was in love with her, you know. You wouldn't do something like that to someone you loved, would you? Even if they broke your heart." "You'd be surprised, Mrs. Cladderstone, very, very surprised. I'm afraid to say that love can make people do strange, idiosyncratic things. We see it all the time, especially if the love is of the obsessive kind. Many crimes we see are connected to obsessed love, or financial gain, of course." "I never said that Neville was obsessive, officer. You misunderstood me there. I said he was possessive. There is a difference, I imagine." "So did your daughter, Mrs. Cladderstone, tell you how Neville Mayers reacted to the break-up? It's very important. Can you remember exactly what she told you?" I noticed the female officer was asking me all the questions, while the male officer, who was older and more senior, listened very quietly in the background, while nibbling the back of his pen and casting me curious glances. Perhaps he thought it was better for his female colleague to ask me all the questions, because they were of a sensitive nature. Maybe he thought she would be more gentle towards me. I frowned. "Not really, officer. My daughter and I are very close, but she doesn't like to talk to me very freely about her love life. She's always been private about the affairs of the heart. She simply told me she broke up with Neville. He didn't take it terribly well. but she told him she couldn't get too serious at this stage of her life. That's all I know, officer. I know my daughter very well, officer. She would have been very tactful about the way she broke up with Neville. She'd have done it very gently. I'm quite sure he would have had nothing to do with any of this. He wouldn't want to harm a hair on my daughter's head. That's a maybe, Mrs. Cladderstone, but we have to rule out all options. If we didn't, we wouldn't be doing our jobs properly. Now I want you to tell me everything that happened the morning when you saw your daughter being abducted by this young man. I told you, officer, I can barely remember anything at all. It happened so fast, like a twinkling of an eye. It was like watching a dragonfly flying across the water. 1 minute it's there, then it's gone. You make a very good point, Mrs. Cladderstone, said the male officer, suddenly injecting himself into the conversation. Things, I imagine, went terribly quickly. They always do. But try and tell us what you do remember. I reluctantly put my teacup down on the coffee table. I'd enjoyed holding the cup because it kept my hands lovely and warm. Well, me and my daughter, officer, have been coming to the cabin that was left to me by my grandparents in their will at every available opportunity. I did think, of course, of selling the place or even renting it out to weekenders, but I couldn't bring myself to doing it because I'm very attached to the place. It was my idea for us to come to Seal Cove Cabin for the weekend. My daughter was terribly keen. She even invited her friend Tally, a girlfriend of hers, to come along with us, who unfortunately had to cancel at the very last moment. It was a dreadful pity, of course, as my daughter would thoroughly have enjoyed being with Tally. They've been besties since my daughter was knee-high to a grasshopper, you know. She literally lives 3 houses away from us on our street in Seattle. I genuinely believe that had Tally been here, the two of them would have been together. So that abductor would never have abducted my daughter because there would have been 2 of them. Why did Tally cancel spending the weekend with your daughter? The male officer inquired. Well, a corner of her tooth came out, would you believe it, at the dinner table the previous night. As a consequence, she was having very insufferable toothache. She booked into an emergency dentist. She was desperately upset that she couldn't come. She's been to Seals Cove on a plethora of occasions. Loves this place to death. It's like a second home from home to her, you could say. I see, said the officer. I'll need you to give me her details so I can speak to her. She might have an insight into your daughter's private life, given she is Myrtle's best friends, and best friends tend to know things. Go on, Mrs. Cladderstone. You were talking about what happened when you arrived here for the weekend. Well, we had a lovely time here, as we always do. Settled in very quickly. Yesterday went by without a single hitch. It was a perfectly lovely day. Me and my daughter went on the canal on her motorboat. We both thoroughly enjoyed the sunshine, watching the seagulls, and of course the seals. We enjoyed a barbecue outside our cabin later that night. It was spectacular. We made s'mores and chatted a little about everything and nothing, as you do. My daughter was in a very happy place, you know. She almost looked as if the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. She seemed heartily relieved to have broken up with Neville Mayers, and was texting some of her girlfriends, who were very surprised the relationship was over, she told me. So you did not see anyone around and about your cabin the previous day, or after you arrived here? Asked the male officer again. Or anyone, for that matter, behaving a little suspiciously, and looking out of place, perhaps? Absolutely not. When I come to think of it, the cabin was very quiet, and has been like that since we arrived here. It was just me and my daughter, the seals and the gulls. I didn't notice any activity from the other 2 cabins close to ours, which was rather odd, because those cabins are usually occupied by guests over the weekends. The owners let them out as weekend retreats, you see. They usually get very booked up. So no, I didn't see anyone around, which was, as I said, rather unusual. Myrtle even commented on how quiet it was. We weren't complaining one bit, of course. It was good to have the place entirely to ourselves. I wasn't going to complain about that. So what happened before your daughter was abducted, Mrs. Cladderstone? Think very carefully. What did you do that morning, from the moment you got up. Well, we both had breakfast like we always do. I made my daughter blueberry pancakes with maple syrup just the way she likes it, served with turkey bacon. My daughter doesn't eat any red meat, you see. My daughter told me that after breakfast she was going to take a motorboat out onto the water. She asked me to join her, but I told her I wanted to relax and read a book, and I'd come out with her later that afternoon. She loves being on the canal on that motorboat of hers, watching the seals diving into the water from their rocky islands. She can watch them for ages, you know. She absolutely adores seals. As you know, the water around here is warmer than in other parts of the Pacific Northwest, so it's very pleasing to be out there on the water. When people are staying in those cabins, it's not unusual for me to see a stranger at the water's edge, sometimes getting into a boat, with crab baskets which they drop into the water with markers to retrieve later, when they hope to haul in a catch of crabs, if you know what I mean. My daughter's done that before, of course, but she's such a softy. She always lets the crabs go in the end. She doesn't want to ever eat them. When it comes to crabs, she examines her catch, takes a great deal of pleasure in releasing them back into the canal. It was probably about an hour ago, but I'd been in the kitchen preparing some tea, iced tea, that is, as it was pleasantly warm outside like it still is now. And when I came out onto the deck of the wraparound porch, I observed my daughter Myrtle on the beach next to the canal, talking very nonchalantly to the young man. Now, I'd never seen him before a day in my life. I immediately thought someone must be staying in one of the cabins. Maybe they'd just moved in, and they were having a nice chat with my daughter. I saw nothing sinister in their conversation. I could only see the young man's back view, of course. I didn't get a close-up view of him. My daughter and this young man both appeared to be laughing at the seagulls, who were masterfully dropping mussel shells from a great height onto the rocks, so they would break open, and the gulls naturally swooped down to the rocks to gobble up the contents. I don't think the young man had ever seen that before, which made me wonder if he was local or not, because he seemed very impressed by the seagulls. Let's not kid, the birds of the Pacific Northwest are remarkably clever. As you can imagine, I wasn't exactly paying close attention to my daughter. I was distracted by the book I was reading. I'd got to a very exciting part, you see. I thought my daughter would have been out on the boat, but the stranger had stopped to talk to her. I thought he was simply asking her about where was the best place to get oysters or something like that. You often get people staying in the cabins asking us for some advice. I had settled down very comfortably on my wicker basket chair to read the book and to enjoy the sunshine that was now streaming onto the deck. And I was bathing in it hungrily like you do, because I've always loved the sun. I'm sure you can see it by my complexion. I have got a thick rhino hide. Well, that was when I heard a scream. At first I thought it was another one of those annoying loud seagulls, making a raucous commotion as they so often do, possibly fighting over scraps. You know the sort of thing. Those seagulls can half scream, let me tell you. But then you probably know that only too well, given that you both live in these parts. The male officer smiled. Yes, I know about the gulls and their screams. Go on, Mrs. Gladstone. You're doing very, very well. You've been very insightful so far. Well, it was something about the scream that made me look up from my book and take a second look. If I hadn't done so, officer, I can assure you I would have never seen what had happened to my daughter. So I'm glad I saw her in that pivotal moment. If I had not done so, I would be dreaming all kinds of alternative, weird, and equally horrifying scenarios as to what could have happened to her. I realized it was my daughter who was screaming. So your daughter was screaming, Mrs. Gladstone. We've established that. You bet she was screaming, officer. There are not words to describe how I felt at that moment. I became paralyzed, as if my entire body had frozen up with fear. Because as a mother, officer, hearing your daughter scream in terror like that is not a sound you would ever wish to hear. I would have changed places with my girl in a heartbeat. I couldn't believe what I was seeing with my naked eye. It was like something out of a horror movie, and happening here in broad daylight of all things, under my very nose. Well, the mind boggles, does it not? Whoever the young man was, officer, he was brazen to do what he did in the middle of the day. He must have been reasonably confident that he wouldn't have been seen.
Maybe he knew that the other two cabins weren't occupied this weekend, Mrs. Gladstone. That would make him extremely confident. That's what I think, officer. Now, the man that Myrtle was talking to, he seemed nice enough. I mean, they'd been laughing together as if they were old friends. Well, I never expected anything untoward like this to happen to her, did I? If the truth be told, I was actually rather glad to see my daughter smile, given how upset she was feeling after having broken up with Neville. My daughter can't bear to hurt a soul, so it made me smile to see her having a good laugh. I remember thinking to myself, I'm so glad I brought her to the cabin for the weekend. Isn't that a joke, officer? I wish I could have seen through a looking-glass, because we'd never have come here if I'd known what was about to happen. This man must have been reasonably strong, Mrs. Gladstone, to run away with your daughter on his back like that. Not really, officer. Of course he was a strapping man. Looked like he worked out every day in the gym. Had very big biceps and that kind of thing. But you must remember my Myrtle is about 90 pounds. She's a skinny thing. Takes after me, she does. It's a genetic thing, you could say. Most people in our family line are predisposed to being rather thin. The young man threw poor Myrtle over his shoulders and ran into the woods. There is a road on the other side of the woods, officer. That is one of those sequestered off-the-beaten-track roads. I'm sure the man had a car of some kind, a vehicle parked out there, as it wouldn't be easily seen, and he probably squirreled my daughter away in it without being seen. Oh, the thought just makes me want to just crumble up and die. It really does. I just can't bear to think of it. He could be long gone by now. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Otherwise, why did he run through the woods like that? He was making his way to that back country road. It can be the only thing he was planning to do. I threw my hands over my mouth and stared at the officer with pleading eyes, almost begging for him to say something that would give me a smidgen of hope. And then I said what I'd been dreading to articulate, but the words tumbled out of my mouth before I had any chance to control them. The abductor's going to rape and kill my daughter. Isn't that right, officer? That's how these things tend to pan out, is it not? I asked him, looking him straight in the eyes. I saw him flinch and glance away from me as quickly as he could, so that his eyes were now fixed on the hardwood floor, because he avoided my gaze, and in doing so he told me everything I needed to know, and affirmed my most dreadful fears. "We hope it won't come to that, ma'am," he said uncomfortably, shifting awkwardly in his seat. This time it was the female officer who took charge of this rather awkward situation. She encouragingly leant forward and gave my hand a tight squeeze. "Mrs. Gladstone, I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you. That wouldn't be a kind thing to do. I'm not going to give you any false hope. I have to warn you that abduction cases are never easy. We don't know how this case is going to end with your daughter, but we are going to do our best to search for her, do our utmost to find her, so we can bring her home to you safe and well." The officer's words made my heart plummet through my chest, as a feeling of great foreboding consumed me. I knew that the outcome of this situation might never be good. During the course of the morning, another policewoman was recruited to stay by my side, almost as if I was a child that needed minding, when all I really wanted to do was to be out there with the search parties looking for my beloved daughter. This woman kept plying me with endless cups of sickening sweet tea, and telling me over and over again that it would be all right. At one point I rudely snapped at her and said, "I know you mean well, but I would appreciate it if you had stopped saying everything is going to be all right. Don't you get it? Nothing will ever be all right again. My daughter has gone missing, and the chances of her coming back safe and well are very, very slim." With that, the woman thankfully shut up. It was from the vantage point of the wraparound porch that overlooked the canal and the distant grove of trees that I sat with the officer at my side, soberly watching many police people and volunteers combing the woods to search for my girl. Just when all hope had run dry, like the last remaining droplet of oil left in the bottle in order to make that life-sustaining bread, there Myrtle was, almost as if she hadn't disappeared at all, almost as if she'd come back from a hiking adventure looking slightly dishevelled and a little worse for wear,
with leafy foliage tangled up in her long blonde hair. Seeing her was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen in my entire life. I gasped at that moment and said, "It's my girl! It's my girl! It's Myrtle!" And from the wrap-around porch, I quickly took flight down the steps, running towards Myrtle, as if my very life depended on it. I was like a supercharged rocket in takeoff. Myrtle was covered in a silver sheet, providing for her thermal warmth, even though there wasn't even a nip in the air. But all that mattered was that she was alive and well, and she'd come back safely to Seal's Cove. I practically threw myself into my daughter's arms. Unrestrained tears of great joy spilled down my cheeks, and for a moment Myrtle looked right through me, with a vacant expression on her face, as if she didn't know me at all. She seemed bewildered, confused, and disorientated, as if she was a goldfish that had been thrown out of her bowl.
"Good news, ma'am. As you can see, we found your daughter. She is safe and well. A bit scratched up she is, as you can see, but no worse for wear,"
said the male officer, grinning from ear to ear, as if he made a habit of finding missing people, and this was another day on the beat for him, so to speak.
"She'll be fine, I'm sure. Your daughter's a bit confused, I'm afraid, Mrs. Gladstone. It does appear she doesn't remember what happened to her, even where or who she is at the moment. But that is quite common with people who've had a shock of some kind. They do tend to suffer from bouts of amnesia. I assure you it's all perfectly normal. Nothing to worry about. It's almost as if she's caught up in some kind of trance, but it'll soon wear off. We will bring her to the station for questioning at a later date, to uncover if she has any recollection of what actually happened to her. But she's been checked over by a medic and by the forensic specialist, and it seems apart from a few scratches on her body, she has not been assaulted or even raped, which is very good news."
That torturous event had happened 3 long weeks ago, and it might as well have been 1,000 light years ago. To all intents and purposes, after we returned home to Seattle, I had not been able to leave the house at all. My irrational fears had plagued me, rendering me almost housebound, and the house I had called home had almost become like a birdcage to me, in which I now found myself trapped. Yet I was the one putting myself in this precarious position, shrinking away with fear from the world. What kind of a mother was I? Goodness gracious me! My daughter was the one that had been abducted, and yet I was the one crawling away into my shell, afraid to breathe in the light of the day, lest it should actually burn me. I needed to get a grip, or my reaction to what had befallen my daughter would be my greatest undoing. It was when I made this decision to rise up out of my comfort zone, like a phoenix from the ashes, that I forced myself to take a walk around our leafy green suburban neighborhood in Seattle. My therapist had recommended I do this. Believe me, on my part it took great courage, but it was the very best thing I could do for myself, because no one can put you back on the horse if you fall off it. You need to get back on the horse on your own. Sometimes you have to face your fears and do it anyway. Otherwise things can get way too out of hand. I had heard of people who were so afraid to leave their homes for years and years on end, for they had become crippled by their fear. I couldn't allow myself to become one of these people. My daughter was naturally very concerned about me, because she'd never seen her own mother reduced to a bag of nerves like this. "Mum, I wish you wouldn't put all this stress on yourself. It's quite unnecessary. It's like you're afraid of your own shadow. Since I was abducted, you've become affrighted by almost everything. You've got nothing to worry about. I'm not going anywhere, am I? Everything turned out all right in the end. Even though I was abducted, the guy never laid a finger on me. I'm home safe and well. Isn't that what matters?"
"That's a maybe, Myrtle. But what you fail to realize is what it's like to be a mother who loves your daughter more than anything else in the world. And can you imagine what I went through over those 8 excruciating hours when I thought I'd lost you forever? It might as well have been 8 long years. It was too awful for words." Morris's account. I had her photograph in my hand. I studied it closely. She would be easy enough to find. She looked like your stereotype pretty average teenage girl. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a slender physique. She was not my type, of course. So many girls nowadays look exactly like her. Sometimes you can barely tell them apart. I'm not being nasty, it's just a fact. Personally, I like a girl who looks different. Someone who isn't afraid to be true to her authentic self. Goes against the status quo, you could say, and doesn't follow the leads of celebrities or social influencers, like so many young people my age tend to do. Something I've never been able to understand. The girls I like have what I would believe is a rebel gene. But by the looks of the photograph that I had been given, I would say that Myrtle Cladderstone was nothing but sweetness and light. As from the day she was born and first drew breath, she probably never cost her mother a single night's sleep. You know the type, seemingly perfect in every way. It was as if she hadn't got a single rebellious streak in her entire body. I find girls like that to be nauseatingly sickening, because they are saccharine sweet, and it seems so artificial, so unnatural to be like that. It's as if they're afraid to be who they really are beneath the pristine veneer that they so easily present to the world. By the looks of the photograph, Myrtle looked natural and fresh-faced, the kind of girl that doesn't endorse the fake look that has become very popular these days among my generation, for reasons I cannot comprehend. Maybe I'm peppered by old-fashioned values, but I like natural beauty, not girls that are looking for lips that are so fat even a goldfish wouldn't be able to tell them apart. And get this, they think it looks attractive. Are you kidding me? Talk about body dysmorphia of the worst kind. Some of those delusional girls want backsides that are so massive you could balance a teapot on them, and I'm not joking about that either. I believe they call the procedure a Brazilian butt lift. It's a surgical procedure that comes with a very real risk of losing your life. But even that prospect, the prospect of dying, doesn't appear to put some of those girls off in investing in a beauty procedure like this. Mind you, to be fair, in the Georgian times women put lead-based paints containing deadly arsenic on their skins for bright eyes and translucent glowing complexions. So I guess every generation has its pitfalls, and will do almost anything for beauty. Some of these so-called social influencers like the Kardashians tell people what beautiful is, as if setting an unrealistic, ridiculously nonsensical standard to my generation, that I believe the wiser, more salient, older generation would think preposterous. And you know what? They're absolutely right. My generation eagerly endorses everything superficial, such as ludicrously over-the-top cosmetic procedures and permanent makeup that make some girls look like an artificial doll rather than a human being. But then maybe that's exactly what they want to look like, as if Barbie has suddenly become very real. Growing up, my sister Eve wanted nothing more than to become like Barbie herself, like so many little girls her age. But I would enjoy telling her that Barbie was very ugly, with a great deal of satisfaction. I absolutely loved pulling my sister's feathers, like a fox in the chicken coop. I just couldn't help myself. My sister's feathers got so easily ruffled, and I thoroughly enjoyed winding her up. It gave me a macabre sense of satisfaction. I guess, in truth, I was a horrible kid brother. Naturally, she wasn't at all impressed with me, would rudely stick her tongue out at me and say, "Morris, you're so stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. Barbie is the most beautiful girl in the whole world." "No, she's not," I would say indignantly, determined to point out the blindingly obvious, which my sister didn't appreciate at all. "She's not even real, is she? She's a doll." At that, my sister would burst into tears, telling me how horrible I was. "I hate you! I hate you, Morris! You're a horrible, horrible brother!" She would give me a disgusted, very mortified look that I've never actually been able to forget. I'm glad to say my sister Eva grew out of her fixation for Barbie, and today she embraces the all-natural, no-makeup look, and she's prettier than all her girlfriends because of it. I could, of course, get on my bandwagon about fake looks, but I won't. Who am I to judge what people do with their appearances? It's a free world, is it not? I just think it's a dreadful pity to tear down a naturally beautiful meadow, filled with exquisite flowers, and put in its place a very mediocre, very modern building that is so much less aesthetically appealing to the naked eye. Some people do not see the error of their ways, do they? Much like myself, of course. When I agree to do something so utterly ridiculous, I cannot actually believe that I agreed to do it in the first place. Ostensibly, it has got to be the stupidest thing I could have ever done, that could potentially have led me to getting into a great deal of trouble with the police, who might have suspected my motives to be extremely nefarious, when they were anything but, because the whole thing was just one big game. In my case, I was not suffering from body dysmorphia, but brain dysmorphia, which I have to say is 1,000 times worse than the former, because no reasonable thinking young man such as myself, of sound mind, would do what I did. I was an ordinary 18-year-old, for goodness sake, that had never done so much as got a late fine for a library book in my entire life, although, to be fair, I've never been to a library, if you know what I mean. I would rather not talk about some of the things I have done in my life that I'm less proud of. But I've never taken myself for a fool until I agreed to do this one thing. I bet you're champing at the bit, wondering what on earth it is that I could have done that was so ridiculously foolish and headstrong on my account. I guarantee in 100 years you wouldn't get it right. You wouldn't believe, you see, that anyone could be ignorant enough to do something this ridiculous. And, of course, you would be 100% right about that. Even now, when I look back, it is with regret and disappointment at myself, wondering what the hell I was thinking. But I don't believe in indulging in hindsight. I mean, it's a little like crying over the empty stable, long after the horse has bolted. I had made a feather-light promise to an old friend of mine, whom I'd known since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. He called in a favour from me, a favour I felt unwilling to oblige. When I was about 11 years old, this good friend of mine called Neville Mayers pretty much saved my life. Neville and I had been best friends going back a long time. He knew I was nursing a secret that I was not proud about, and that no one knew about, because it made me ashamed. I couldn't swim from an early age because I had an irrational fear of the water, for reasons I don't even know. My mother would joke about it light-heartedly, and say that maybe in a previous incarnation I had been on the Titanic, and based on my horrifying memories of drowning in that ice-cold water, was it any wonder I was so afraid of water now? My mother was into all this woo-woo stuff, you see, believing that in previous lifetimes, well, she had been a nurse in the most recent one, she claimed, for the wounded victims of war in World War I. I thought my mother's ideas were ludicrous, for I didn't believe in reincarnation of any kind. But it was true. I was desperately afraid of the water. I was on a boat ride on the lake on a camping trip with friends of mine. Now, I didn't mind being on the lake in a boat. That was a whole different scenario, because I wasn't in the water. I was about 10 years old at the time. One of the boys pushed me into the dark, murky water of the lake from the boat, just as a joke. He had absolutely no idea I couldn't swim, and what he'd done could potentially cost me my life. I had stood up on the boat, you see, leaning over the edge to watch a catfish scooting past me. I was in awe about the humongous size of this large fish. "Look at that fish! It's a catfish! It's massive!" I cried out excitedly. All 5 of us kids were leaning over the boat to inspect this marvellous fish that we'd seen, all expressing how cool it was. One of the kids got a bright idea in his head. He thought it would be hilariously funny, as he was seeing me leaning over the edge of the boat, to give me a push-over into the water. It became like one of those pie fights you see on the movies, where everyone suddenly gets involved. So you don't even know who started the fight in the first place, but you all get stuck into lathering each other with pie. In this case, it was with water. What happened next was everyone was being pushed over the boat, kicking and laughing and spluttering, and they were forced to swim to shore. or try otherwise to climb back into the boat. Most did the former, leaving the boat empty of any passengers on the lake. I went down into the icy depths of the water like a heavy stone, and in that moment I was absolutely certain that this place would become my watery grave. In my desperate panic, I wrestled frantically with the water, desperately trying to keep my head above the water so that I could breathe. I was kicking my arms and legs furiously, and the other kids thought I was being a comic and found my frantic moves to be terribly funny. I tried to swim through the water, but I couldn't do it. It was useless. The water dragged me down to its merciless depths. By this time, the other 3 kids had swum to the shore. The musical trills of their laughter could be heard around the lake. I was rescued by my very good friend Neville Mayers. How he rescued me, I don't know. He was strong and somehow managed to help me get back into the empty boat, but I'm sure I must have been a dead weight for him. He proceeded to row us back to the shore. No one knew that Neville had saved my life that day, nor did Neville tell anyone my shameful secret, but graciously kept the fact that I was unable to swim all to himself. Everyone proclaimed that I was an excellent actor.
You made it look like you were drowning in the water. You were good, said Paul.
We all just laughed, but only Neville knew the real truth. I remember he even tapped his nose and said,
"Your secret's safe with me, Morris." "I owe you," I said. "You saved my life."
I was at home on the day that Neville called me. I hadn't seen or heard from my old friend in quite a while. We were both teenagers at the time. I was 18 years old, but many people thought I looked like I was in my early 20s, probably because of my regular gym workouts with my father that had given me a strapping physique. When Neville contacted me out of the blue, I will say this, I was rather taken aback, but naturally pleased to hear from an old friend of mine, because we go back such a long time. In the early years we'd lived next door to each other, until Neville's parents had moved away from the neighbourhood to somewhere infinitely more affluent, as Neville's father had made some big money with his shares in the aviation industry. Neville said he needed to see me over something that was very important. We arranged to meet at a local diner called the Spicy Bird, a popular meeting place for teenagers such as myself, as it offers affordable, inexpensive food and very good burgers, as well as hot chicken wings that are not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you. It's only a brave soul that will get stuck into one of those. When we were eating our burgers, it was then that Neville reminded me of the camping trip we had been on when we were kids, which was something he'd never brought up before, or even since the event. "Do you remember the camping trip we went on all those years ago, and how you very nearly drowned in the lake?" he asked me. I looked up at him in surprise and said, "That's not something I'd easily forget. You saved my life, bro. Thanks to you, soon after that event, I learnt to swim, and I got over my fear of water. Remember when you got on the boat? You told me you owed me because I'd saved your life. You remember that, Morris?" "Of course I remember, and I meant every word of it," I said, wondering where this conversation was going. "But that was a long time ago, bro. A whole nother lifetime, you could say. But I'm sincerely grateful for what you did. I've never been able to forget that. Well, I arranged to meet up with you today, Morris. Not only because it's obviously good to catch up with an old friend, but I have another reason, that I needed to see you. I must say you're looking extremely good, Morris. You've got biceps on you that make me feel as if I need to get back to the gym in a hurry, that's for sure." "Well, I've been working hard on my body," I said, "because I was sick of being so puny." "It seems I'm the puny one now," said Neville. "That's if I compare myself to you." I chuckled. "You puny? Never. I imagine you're still out there right now breaking women's hearts left, right and centre wherever you go. Nothing changes in that regard, and you certainly haven't lost your good looks, bro." "Thanks, it's kind of you to say, Morris," said Neville, his expression suddenly growing incredibly solemn. He wiped a napkin across his lips to brush away some of the crumbs that had gathered there from the burger. Then he took a large, refreshing swig of his glass of iced tea. For a moment he stared at the glass, as if lost in thought. Then he suddenly focused his steely gaze on me, with one of those intense looks I knew so well from our childhood. I knew whatever he was going to say next was significantly important to him, by the very deep tone of his voice. Even though we haven't seen each other for a while, Morris, we've always been the best of friends, have we not? And I've always had your back. For sure, I said. I know I saved your life that day when we were out on the lake in the boat. You were about 10 years old, as was I. I figure you owe me, bro. So I'm going to take you up on your offer that you made back then. I want to call in a big favor. I took a large gulp of my double thick lime milkshake, allowing the smooth, creamy drink to moisten the scratchy feeling that suddenly engulfed the back of my throat, that became very uncomfortable with the gravity of Neville's words, that pierced through bone, marrow, and sinew. Why did I have an ominous feeling about all of this? And even when Neville had phoned me, the urgent tone of his voice had left me feeling rather rattled. There was such a resolutely determined look on his face that was scaring me half to death. Growing up, Neville had always been rather headstrong, and when he wanted something he would willfully go for it, irrespective of the stumbling blocks in his way, or how many people he had to tread over in order to acquire his goal. But whatever he was asking for me to do, I hope to God it wasn't something that involved breaking the law. I may owe my best friend a favour, but surely there were limits. To put it bluntly, Neville could be pretty ruthless, and would probably have made an excellent politician one day, because he was a master manipulator. He was one of those people you knew would succeed in life, because he was so focused and committed, and was good at everything he did from sports to academia. And the girls naturally loved him, because he was extremely good-looking, and that certainly helped. Besides all that, he had a tongue on him that was so smooth he could charm the socks off an old lady. Growing up, Neville had always been headstrong and willful, and when he wanted something doing, he'd go for it, irrespective of the stumbling blocks in his way, or how many people he had to tread over in order to accomplish his goal. But whatever he was asking of me, I hope to God it wasn't something that involved breaking the law. I may owe my friend a favour, but there were limits on what I was prepared to do, surely. But to put it bluntly, Neville could be pretty ruthless, and would probably have made an excellent politician, because he was a master manipulator. He was one of those people you knew would succeed, because he was so focused and committed in everything he did, and was good at everything from sports to academia. The girls naturally loved him, because he was extremely good-looking, and it helped, of course, that he had a tongue on him that was so smooth he could charm the socks off an old lady. Growing up, even when Neville was as young as 10 years old, the girls would always giggle and whisper when he was around, and I remember at the time I envied him greatly for being so popular with them, because I would have liked to have been just like him, but not any more. "What is it you want me to do, bro?" I asked him. "It better not be anything illegal. I'm very thankful you saved my life that day, Neville. I really am. I'll never forget what a loyal friend you've been to me over the years. But you do realize there are limits to what I'm willing to do for you. I hope you appreciate that." "Keep your hair on, Morris. I haven't told you what the favour is yet, have I? So don't assume I'm asking you to murder someone on my behalf," he said with a muted laugh that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up on end. "But then what is it you want me to do?" I asked, eyeing Neville suspiciously through narrowing eyes. "Why do I not feel comfortable about this?" I asked him. Neville paused for a brief moment. His eyes remained fixed on his glass of iced tea. He began staring at the tea, as if it was a source of great fascination for him. The truth was, in that moment, he simply refused to meet my eyes, and playing with his glass appeared to be a useful distraction for him. Finally he came out and said it, in a very low voice that was almost inaudible for a moment. "There's this girl. Her name is Myrtle. I'm head over heels in love with her. She's the one for me, bro, if you know what I mean. I'm completely smitten by her. I've never ever felt this way about a girl before. Do you know what that's like?" "But you're only 18, I said. "How can you possibly know how you really feel about her? You're still young. You should be out there enjoying yourself like everybody else, not getting too serious over one girl. Not now. Sometimes you just know, bro. When you meet the right person, that is. There is no way I can possibly lose Myrtle. No way. If I lost her, it would be like my whole world would come crashing down on me. Do you understand what I'm saying, Morris?" "Not really, bro. I can't say I've ever felt that way about a girl before. I've been infatuated, of course, many times, but that has never lasted. I'm very happy for you, bro, I really am. But what has your feelings towards this girlfriend of yours got to do with me?" I paused for a second, and then it occurred to me that my friend was about to announce that he was getting married. "You're getting married, is that it? You want me to be your best man? Is that what this is about?" I looked at Neville through wide eyes and said, "Oh my God, it is, isn't it? But you can't get married at 18, bro. That's insane. You're far too young. You need to think about this before you jump into the deep end. You might regret it if you do." Neville looked decidedly awkward for a moment. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, straightening up his back and looking at me through wide, earnest eyes. "I wish I was asking you to be my best man, Morris, and I hope I will one day, because I wish I was getting married to Myrtle. But you're getting ahead of yourself, I'm afraid." "Oh, well, that's a relief," I said. "You had me going for a moment. So go on, then. What is this all about? You've got me curious now." "Myrtle broke up with me the day before yesterday. Can you bloody believe that? It knocked me for 6, it did. Man, I love that girl. I thought things were perfect between us. I really did. We went to a party. I got upset with her for talking to another guy who made no secret of the fact he fancied her. It was insulting the way he was, salivating over her. Well, I told her I didn't like it one bit, and then she pretty much told me to get over myself, and it was over between us for good. I'm sorry to hear that, bro, really I am. That sucks. You know what they say. You win some and you lose some. It's the game of life, is it not?" Neville's eyes became wider. So wide, in fact, they reminded me of saucers. He looked at me fiercely. "Didn't you hear a word I was saying, Morris? I can't lose her. I can't. She's the one for me. Do you get that? I will do absolutely anything to get her back. Anything. I need her to see that we are meant to be together. Forever. Look, bro, you've always been a good friend to me, so I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I'm very sorry to hear that she's broken up with you. It happens to the best of us. But if it's any consolation, I'm sure you'll meet someone else. You know what they say. There are many more fish in the sea. That's what my mother is always reminding me when I've been upset over a girl. And you know she's right. There are good people out there. I'm sure you'll meet someone else." "But I don't want anybody else," said Neville. "I'm madly in love with Myrtle. Why the hell would I want anyone else if I can have her?" "Well, there's nothing I can do about it, can I, bro? I can hardly hold a gun to your ex's temple and tell her to date you if it's against her will to do so, can I? You can't force anyone to do something they don't want to do. Besides anything else, I'm pretty useless at relationships, and giving any relationship advice, well, I'm useless at that too. I think my longest relationship with a girl has been about 6 months. So you're asking the wrong person for advice," I said, letting out a muted laugh. "I don't want advice, Morris. I don't need advice. If I wanted advice, I'd go to my older brother Ethan. But much like you, he's told me to just let her go, and I can't do that. There's no way I can do that." "Well, that's sound advice if you ask me, bro. Ethan has always had a good head on his shoulders. He's 8 years older than you, is he not? He's had much more life experience with girls. He knows what he's talking about." "That's a maybe, but he hasn't got a clue, Morris. He doesn't understand the torment I'm going through. No one does. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything. I have to get Myrtle back. She's all I think about, 24/7. I can't get her out of my mind." "You've got it bad, Neville. I don't know what this girl has done to you, but she must be pretty special to have made such an impact on you. Finally you get it, Morris. That's it, she is special, very special. Which is why I need you to do something for me that will make Myrtle realize how much she needs me, how much she depends on me, and that she can't live without me. I think if she's made to feel extremely vulnerable and insecure, if she senses her life may have been in perilous danger, she will come running to me for cover, and I will be able to look after her, protect her, offer her solace and comfort. I'll be the shoulder for her to cry on. That way she won't ever want to be without me again. I will give her the safety she's craving. I know this plan will work. I've figured it all out. And even if it doesn't, what have I got to lose?" When Neville told me what he wanted me to do, I was flabbergasted. I thought his seemingly ingenious plan was absolutely insane, completely over the top, and it certainly did not come without risks. I could potentially get into heaps of trouble by the police, and worse still, insidiously deplorable labels could be attached to my personality and character, like abductor, pervert, or even rapist. I could potentially go to prison for a very long time for this. Neville, who was always a masterful manipulator, persuaded me that all would go very well, and that the plan was pretty plain sailing. "But you want me to abduct your girlfriend? Do you realize it's insane? What a crazy idea! How can I do that? Do you realize what trouble I would be in if I was caught? I told you there were limits to what I would do to help you, Neville. I could talk to your girlfriend if you like, try and make her see sense. But abduction, that's not right, bro. Surely you can see that." "But you're not really abducting her, are you, Morris? I want you to pretend you're abducting her. There is a huge difference. You need to allow her to believe that she is in mortal danger, that you're a dangerous predator with malicious intent. That means her grievous harm. You're playing a part, Morris. You're like an actor in a movie. You're going to be the predator in this movie, but it doesn't mean you really are a predator. You're playing the part of a predator. You're going after her. You're scaring her. You're following a script, so to speak. But you're doing nothing of the kind. But you want her to believe that you are. You allow her to escape your clutches, so she thinks she got away from you within an inch of her life. You can even pretend to chase after her, and then give up with exhaustion. That's the whole point of this exercise. I want her vulnerability buttons to be pushed, so she will come running to me. And then I will make her realize how much she needs me, how she can't live without me. I can't lose her, Morris. I need you to do this for me. You owe me, Morris. You know you do. You can't break a promise to me. Not your old friend. I will remind you again that I saved your life that day. And not only that, I kept your secret, that you couldn't swim from all those other kids. I've been good to you, bro. You owe me.
Myrtle's account. It was the final straw for me when my boyfriend Neville Mayers asked me who I'd been talking to at the barbecue party that we had been invited to that Sunday for Shelby Brenner's 16th birthday. I think 60 people had been invited to that party at her house. I was having a phenomenal time, but as usual Neville Mayer was literally cramping my style yet again, and was seriously beginning to get on my nerves and irritate me. I'd seen his dark eyes drilling into me earlier on in the evening, as I talked to Dylan, one of my oldest friends going back to my kindergarten days. We began to ruminate nostalgically about old times together, as you do, when you catch up with someone you haven't seen in an age. We were both laughing together a lot. At one point during my casual chat with Dylan, I could feel Neville's scorching, searing gaze burning into me, and I could sense he was furiously upset with me, that I was talking to another boy. Even Dylan glanced over at Neville, and then back at me again and said, "I don't think your boyfriend likes me talking to you. He's giving me murderous looks, I'm afraid. He does realize we're only good friends. I think he thinks I'm coming on to you. Tell him he's got nothing to worry about there." "Oh, don't worry about him," I chuckled, glancing in Neville's direction and giving him a burning glare that he wouldn't forget in a hurry. "Neville is, you know, rather possessive, you could say. He's jealous if anyone tends to pay me attention. He even gets upset if my own girlfriends want to spend time with me. It's driving me nuts."
"He's got it bad for you," said Dylan, looking vaguely disquieted. "Watch out for him. He can get hell of an intense, that's all I'm saying. I've heard stories about Neville from my friends, and they're not all good, I'm afraid."
"What do you mean?" I asked him.
"Well, all I'm saying is that if you want out of your relationship with him at any point, then get out of it sooner rather than later. Because once that man's got his claws into you, you won't be able to escape his fearsome clutches. I know the type. My father was exactly like Neville towards my mother, so I can see the warning signs a mile off. Let's just say he sucked the life out of my poor mother, until it got to the stage where he completely dominated her, so that she became like a robotic slave, doing his every bidding all the time. Thankfully, it was my mother's sister Natalie that opened her eyes to what was really going on under her roof. She was the one that told my mother that she was being swallowed alive by my father. When my mother realized the error of her ways and how downtrodden she had become because of my father, she told him it was over between them. She suddenly seemed to grow a pair and stood up to the man. I was proud of her. We all were. It was the best thing she ever did. My mother was being suffocated by the stranglehold of my father. She couldn't be herself because my father took over the house with his dominating character, and there wasn't any breathing room left for anyone else. So my parents got divorced. Me and my mother and sister celebrated because my mother felt free for the first time in her entire life. And after she severed ties with my dad, she was such a different person. Regretfully, my father stalked her for many months afterwards. He was fixated over her. She filed a restraining order against him. And finally he got the message and moved away to another state. Haven't heard from him since, and don't want to either. You need to be careful, that's all I'm saying, Myrtle."
"You think Neville's obsessed by me?" I asked. "You think he's like your father was towards your mother? Is that what you're saying?"
"I sure do. Look at the way he's looking at you. That's exactly how my father used to look at my mother. It's a bit of a red flag to me, you see. I don't want you getting embroiled in a toxic relationship, Myrtle. I've always liked you. You're a good friend to me. And I would hate to see you ending up like my mother did. I know it's none of my business, of course, but I'm just saying be careful and always on your guard."
Once I'd finished my chat with Dylan, I walked over to Neville nonchalantly. He grabbed my hand so hard that I winced out in pain. It was as if I was a dog on a leash, who had out-of-control behaviour that he wanted to correct. And in that moment Dylan's words rang into my head like a resounding church bell.
"Get out while you can."
The truth was my relationship with Neville had been going from bad to worse of late. In the beginning I'd fallen hard for Neville, because every single girl in my year thought he had film star looks, as he did. So when he asked me out, I felt as if I was the girl that snagged the prince. The weeks rolled into months, and I could soon see that Neville was becoming increasingly fixated over me. At first I was rather flattered and charmed by his adoration, but that was short-lived. I was beginning to feel suffocated by the relationship, like an oxygen-starved seal, desperately needing to come up for air, but every air pocket in the entire ice seemed to be blocked up by Neville himself. As much like Dylan's father had taken over his mother's life, like a fast-growing rampant cancer, eating away at all the good cells. Neville, I hasten to say, was doing the very same thing to me. I was losing my identity in this relationship. I barely knew who Myrtle was these days, and even my mother commented that I'd lost my sparkle. Neville seemed to want to own me, as if I was a thing and not a person. It was like he was possessing me, so if anyone came near me of the opposite sex, he'd invariably pull the reins in, tightening his hold on me. It was obvious he didn't trust me to behave around other guys. When someone does that to you, all you want to do is to escape and run away. Neville looked incensed. His face went a deathly pale colour. He looked at me through burning, outraged eyes.
Get real, Myrtle, for God's sake. He was making a play for you. Anyone could see that. I saw the way he was looking at you. He was drooling over you like a dog over a bone. You need to watch out. You can be naively ignorant at times, he said, shaking his head ruefully. It's a good job you've got me to tow you into Lion.
Oh, for goodness sake, Neville, listen to yourself. Why on earth are you so possessive? If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were jealous.
I'm not jealous. I'm just concerned about you giving out all the wrong messages. The last thing I want is for you to make a spectacle of yourself this evening in front of all these people, said Neville, pulling me closer to his chest and laying a protective arm around me that made me inwardly cringe. I just want the best for you, Myrtle. You know that.
In that moment, I could take it no longer. I was like a pressure cooker that had been boiling away on the stovetop. And then I exploded, pushing myself away from Neville. I glared at him furiously and waved my fists at him in a threatening gesture, something I'd never ever done before. It's over, Neville. Do you hear that? It's over. I'm breaking up with you now.
What have I done? You're not being serious. You said you loved me. Don't overreact over all of this. For goodness sake.
I don't love you, Neville. I don't think I ever did. Yes, you're a nice enough guy, and I wish you the very best. But we're not right for each other. I feel as if I can't breathe when I'm around you. You suffocate me, Neville. Don't go blaming Dylan for this, because none of this is his fault. I don't fancy Dylan, and I don't fancy you. So it's got nothing to do with him. So don't get any funny ideas about this. I know how your mind works, Neville. The truth is, I've been wanting to break up with you for quite a while, but I haven't had the courage to do it until now. But it's just not going to work out between us.
You're upset, Myrtle. You know you are. You're taking this out on me. I get it. You're upset because Dylan is a good friend of yours, and you think I overreacted. But we can talk about this, can we not?
There is no point in talking about anything, Neville. Don't you get it? Because I know what you're like. You'll talk me round. You'll persuade me that we belong together and that you love me. But the truth is, I can't breathe when I'm around you. I need my space. And I'm sorry. But it's over. It has to be.
Look, Myrtle, you don't know what you're saying. You're talking out of a limb now because your mind is all over the place. But I love you. Doesn't that count for something?
We can't work anything out, Neville. I'm sorry. As I keep saying to you, it's over between us. And with that, I stormed away, with Neville begging me for forgiveness. But I just refused to listen. Ever since I'd broken up with Neville, the text messages had rolled in, hundreds of them, where Neville professed his undying love to me, but I ignored all of them. The truth was, I really felt so much lighter without him in my life, and dare I say it, a whole lot happier. I knew I should have broken up with him an awfully long time ago, but I couldn't bring myself to doing it for fear of hurting him. I was glad he had succeeded in pressing my buttons at the party, as it was the quintessential opportunity for me to take the bull by the horns and do what I meant to do a long time ago. I'm glad it was Dylan who opened my eyes to what Neville was actually doing to me, sucking me dry like a blood-sucking leech. Letting him go was the best thing I'd ever done for myself. Of course, I felt bad about hurting him, but hurting someone goes with the territory of ending any relationship. I didn't tell my mother much about my breakup with Neville, as there are some personal things I didn't wish to share with her. But she was the one that intuitively sensed, in the way that mothers always do, that I'd been through a rather rough ordeal having to break up with Neville, So she asked me how I felt about going to Seal's Cove for the long weekend. "Oh, that would be brilliant! Are you being serious, Mum?" I said, my face lighting up like a Christmas tree. "Can I bring Tally along?"
"But of course you can bring your best friend along. That is if she's free. I think that's a fabulous idea. The more the merrier. That's what I say."
I hadn't told Tally, my very best friend, that I'd broken up with Neville. I could have told her, on the phone of course, but I didn't want to do that. I needed to tell her in private. But regretfully she'd cancelled the weekend, when she came down with a sudden toothache, after breaking her tooth over an olive stone during dinner the previous night. It was such a bummer. I was sad she wasn't going to be joining us. I wanted to tell her my true feelings about Neville, and how happy I was to have broken up with him. Tally was a very good friend of mine, my very best friend. I knew she would be incredibly pleased to hear my news. She was one of the few people in my year that genuinely did not like Neville. All the other girls in my year thought that the sun shone out of Neville's backside. The trouble was they didn't know what he was really like behind closed doors, and I did. "What's wrong with him?" I'd asked her at the time, when Neville and I had started going out. Tally had shrugged her shoulders rather nonchalantly and pulled a face. "I don't know. It's more a feeling I have about him," she said. "He strikes me as being rather slippery. That's all. And I just don't think he can be trusted. Since you've been going out with him, and I know it's only recent, but he seems to be smothering you a lot. I notice he doesn't even like it when you're talking to me, or any of your other friends for that matter. He's already possessive, and it's early days in your relationship. What's he going to be like when you've been out together for a long time? It's not healthy. If he had his way, he'd lock you up in his house and bring you out to play like a kid with a toy train that doesn't want to share his toys with anyone. Don't be ridiculous. Neville's not like that," I had sniped. "But he is," Tally insisted. "I think he's a little obsessed over you, Myrtle. Open your eyes, for goodness sake." "He's not like that," I had insisted. "You don't know what you're talking about, Tally." I knew now I was going to have to tell Tally, when she called me after her painful tooth had finally settled down, that she was right about Neville. I was glad to be free of him. How had I got him so terribly wrong? If the truth be told, Neville was incredibly good-looking. All the girls in my year fancied him, and when he took a shine to me, I felt like the luckiest girl in the entire world, because all my friends were so envious of me. When I looked into Neville's dreamy green eyes, I really thought I had found my Prince Charming. I wasn't to know what he was really like. Now I was beginning to realize that appearances can be extremely deceptive, and that my mother was right about things like that. Neville was more like a toad than a prince, and that was being kind. My mother was always telling me that people of my generation are so quick to judge the book by its cover. She was right about that. So many of my friends were guilty of this. But Neville had successfully drawn me in, like a fish at the end of a fisherman's line. It was on the second day of my stay at Seal Cove's cabin with my mother, when I was getting out my motorboat to get out onto the water, so I could enjoy watching the seals, as I always did. A handsome young man approached me. He could have been 17 or 18 years old. He was rather well built, and at a distance he could have easily been mistaken for being somewhat older. I'd never seen him before a day in my life, but I assumed he was staying at one of the cabins that I initially assumed had not been occupied, for there had been no signs of any human life around on our stretch of the canal.
"Hi there. It's a lovely morning, is it not? I can see you're about to go onto the water on your boat."
"Well, something like that. It's such a beautiful day. I love watching the seals, so I enjoy going out there on the water."
"Well, I'm very interested in going out onto the water myself, I have to say. Do you come out here a lot?"
"Yes, I do, as it happens. My mother owns the Seal Cove cabin over there," I said, pointing to the cabin. "So we come here quite frequently for long weekends or so. I take it you're staying in one of the other cabins. Which one are you staying in, the Sea Urchin or the Tidal Wave?" The young man nodded after I said Tidal Wave, so I automatically assumed that that was the cabin he was probably staying in.
Very glad that you know this place so well, because I was looking for some help. I need to find my bearings here, and I'm a tad confused, I have to admit."
"You do look a little lost," I chuckled.
"Is it that obvious?"
"Well, strangers can stick out here rather like a sore thumb, if you know what I mean. Is there anything I can help you with? I can tell you where you can get the best oysters, and a good hamburger place if that helps. Depends on what you want to know, I guess, but I know quite a lot about this part of the world."
"No, I was thinking more of doing a spot of crabbing myself. Do you know the best place to catch crabs around here?"
"Well, personally, I find the water over there, to the right of that rocky outcrop. Well, that's an excellent place to get crabs. One time I got a ton of them, but I always let them loose. I can't ever bring myself to eating them."
"You let them loose?" said the young man, looking rather taken aback. "But why would you want to do a thing like that? Do you realize how delicious crabs actually are to eat?"
"I'm afraid I'm a bit soppy when it comes to sea creatures. I also particularly love octopuses. I once saw a fisherman trying to spear an octopus. The octopus was fighting to escape the spear. It was wiggling around desperately. My heart broke for the poor thing. You see, those things are incredibly intelligent. People don't realize how bright they are. And I'm sorry, but I refuse to eat anything that intelligent. It just seems morally wrong as far as I'm concerned. Believe it or not, I actually paid the fisherman for the octopus. So I had the opportunity to set it free myself. Best decision I ever made. Honestly, I could sense the octopus was so relieved that I'd saved his life. It was such a good feeling. I felt so liberated doing that."
"Are you mad, letting all that delicious food go? You're missing out on a great feast there. If you're not careful, you won't be able to eat anything because you'll feel so sorry for the food in question."
"Well, there are lots of things I don't feel sorry for when it comes to food. I don't feel sorry for mussels and oysters. I can eat those liberally because they're not terribly bright. I kind of like crabs and octopus. I feel sentimental towards them. So that's why I can't eat them. But it's not as if I'm a vegan or even a vegetarian. You know, I do eat fish occasionally."
"Well, I suppose there's a first time for everything." "What the hell?" said the young man, looking over his shoulders. "Did you hear that crashing sound over there on the rocks? What on earth is that?"
"It's the seagulls," I giggled. "They throw the mussels onto the rocks to break them open. It's so lovely to watch. I could watch them all day if given a chance. They're very clever birds. You have no idea how many times a seagull has snatched a sandwich from my hand. The first time it happened, I was as mad as hell, because I'd made a delicious peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The bird just snatched it away. I remember running after it and crying, 'Give it back to me! Give it back to me!' I saw the seagull perching on a branch and scoffing the sandwich, and I swear he was laughing at me as if to say, 'I got it first, so there you go.'" The young man let out a mock laugh. I observed a strange look in his eyes, which made me think he was debating something in his mind. Was he thinking of asking me out, and was too shy to do so or something? For a second we watched the birds masterfully break open the shells on the rocks by dropping them from a great height, and then plunging to the ground to gobble up their contents. What happened next had me totally unprepared. The young man reached out for me, grabbed me, and threw me over his shoulders. At first I thought this was some kind of humorous game on his part, and he was toying with me, so I began to giggle. I mean, he'd been ever so nice to me, hadn't he? Now in a complete 180, he was running with me on his back, and then I had a profound sense that no, this was no game, and the man was trying to actually abduct me. So my giggling subsided. "Are you kidding me? Moments before we'd been lackadaisically watching the seagulls together. We'd been laughing and enjoying a conversation, and I genuinely liked this young man. Now he was whisking me away, as if it was not crabs he wanted to catch after all, but a girl such as myself, for nefarious reasons, no doubt. Why did I get men so horribly wrong? Was I such a poor judge of character that I'd been unable to discern his unethical intent towards me? My mother told me later that I'd screamed, but I had no memory of that, as everything was such a blur, as if my whole world was spinning around me. I do remember kicking my legs and telling the young man to put me down. "Put me down!
Put me down! Let me go! Let me go! Stop this! Stop this!
But he refused to do so. I realized I was no match for him, as I've never been particularly strong, and I was very light, especially for this young man, who was probably lifting weights much heavier than me on a regular basis. What could he possibly want with me, I wondered. "Please," I continued, "please put me down." My muted cries were not heard by him, or if they were, he simply ignored them. I could feel the young man's heavy breathing, and the fingers that held me down were becoming increasingly sweaty. I needed to get away from him. That was my only hope for survival. But how? I remember I'd watched a crime documentary once with my mother. It was about some of those serial rapists who on the surface look so benign and so benevolent, when in reality they were anything but. Was this young man just like that? I didn't know that fear had the power to incapacitate you, but believe me, it really does. It can be like a fast freeze that comes upon you. So many people say that in moments of terror, you get a rush of much-needed adrenaline that enables you to run like you have never run before. It becomes like a life-giving fuel. But I'm here to tell you that that is not always the case. In my vulnerable position on this man's back, I felt like a wilted flower that was resigned to my inevitable plight. Surely there had to be some fight left in me, but honestly the shock of what had just transpired had drained me of all my energy reserves, rather like a car engine that has completely run out of gas and just becomes unstuck on the road, barely able to move. I may have been 16 at the time, where the body is supposed to be robust and vigorously healthy, but in my case, I might as well have been an old, dilapidated, rusty car that was rotting away in someone's backyard, that was long since forgotten about, because I had run out of all my steam. The young man was incredibly strong and very fit, I'll give him that. But his running technique left something to be desired. I imagine he spent all his time lifting up weights, but didn't pay much attention to his aerobic techniques. His running was rather cumbersome, and he jolted me up and down on his back. And yet, despite the stumbling awkwardness of this journey, I don't think it was a big deal for him to carry me at all. If I'd been heavier, it might have been a different matter. I had only heard my mother just crying out, "Stop! Put my daughter down! What are you doing with her? Leave her alone! What are you doing? Put her down!" But she failed to catch up with us, as the man ran with me on his back as fast as he could through the woods. It was when we came to the sequestered dirt road at the edge of the woods, I saw the rather battered, worn-out red vehicle parked on the side of the road, that I knew at once must belong to the young man. And I knew he intended to take me away in his truck for nefarious reasons. Of that I was certain. I knew I could not get into that vehicle under any circumstances. They always say that you should fight for your life and scream as loud as you possibly can before you get into a stranger's vehicle, because once you're in their car, your chances of surviving your abduction become pretty grim. The tragedy was I was in a quiet place, a lonely, forsaken dirt road, a wood grove abandoned of all people. No one would hear my cries or come to my rescue. The man hauled me on his shoulders, gripping my ankles tightly with his hands, and then he dumped me down onto the ground next to the trunk of his car, which he opened with one hand. He told me to climb in. In that second, with a sparkle of unbridled energy I didn't know I had, once my feet hit the ground, I wrestled the young man, kicking her with my arms and legs as he pulled me over to the trunk. At one point I remember I bit him on the arm after he seized me. He pulled away his arm and cried out in pain. I then hurriedly kicked him in the groin, and he doubled over, grunting to himself. In that second I seized the moment like a fresh gasp of air that had been deprived me. This was my quintessential opportunity to escape, and I grabbed it gladly with both hands. I found myself running away as fast as I possibly could from this man, while he began to give me chase. Well, so I thought at the time, because I could hear his painful grunts. I was like a hunted deer trying to escape the jaws of a hungry coyote. In my exhaustion, I tried to catch my breath, but it was flailing me. I felt as if my lungs were going to collapse and finally burst. That was if I didn't stop for a second to rest. I knew I would pass out and die if I wasn't careful. My heart was pounding so furiously fast in my chest, and I was sure I was going to peg out in any second. I hurriedly crawled behind some bushy ground cover, hoping that this hiding place would be good enough to conceal me. I was too exhausted to run a stitch more. I was so terrified the young man would finally find me, dragging me back to his car, and if he did, I didn't fancy my chances of overcoming him. That was when something so extraordinary happened, something so paradoxically bizarre, that I would have been forgiven for thinking that I had been suspended in an alternative reality. A great big hairy arm reached through the shrubbery and grabbed me from my hiding position. I was immersed among these thorny briars that were slicing my skin, tearing at my flesh rudely, drawing blood. I was lifted up out of these thorny briars to about 8 feet in the air. I found myself being flung onto a large, hairy, humongous-sized back, and this thing that began to carry me took off like a steam train, charging through the woods on powerful, very nimble legs. And compared to the young man's ungainly efforts to carry me over a distance, this creature, by contrast, moved so seamlessly, as if I weighed less than a feather, and carrying me was no hindrance at all. It would seem I had been thrown from one terrifying situation straight into another, rather like a car having a head-on collision with a lorry, only to find around the next corner another lorry awaits him. The driver soon realizes he's not out of the woods yet, but veering straight into another disaster. By now I was in such a heightened state of fear, I had no clue what the hell was happening to me. It was as if my mind was suddenly made up of fluffy cotton wool balls. I just couldn't think straight. My thoughts were all over the place, like a jelly bean in a glass jar being rattled around furiously by a child, until the jelly bean itself begins to disintegrate. The powerful hairy creature holding me down had fingers the size of sausages, and smelt strongly of pine needles and earthy smells that you associate with the earth. I don't know if my abductor had seen the thing that had seized me, but had he done so, he would have invariably scuttled away like a frightened dung beetle, diving under a rock to take cover, because he would not have been any match for whatever it was that had chosen to abduct me. I don't think anyone has been abducted twice in one day, but it had happened to me. At one point the creature that had been carrying me squatted on her knees and helped me down from her shoulders, so I slid to the ground with my sneaker-covered feet touching a cold stone floor. I had no idea where I was. It looked to be a small cave among the rocks. The cave was dry and reasonably warm. The smooth rock face was covered in strange carvings, which I imagine might have been done by the creature herself, although I couldn't be sure about that. But there were sharp stones next to the carvings that I suspected were used as carving tools. There were beds on the floor made up of branches for the base, mosses and leaves for the top of the bed. I was to find out later just how comfortable that bed would be. I was too exhausted to run away at this point. My fear handicapped my ability to move. My whole body had become rigidly stiff and as unobliging as that of an old man. I found myself staring into the leathery grey but very human face of a Bigfoot. I began to shake and tremble like a half-set bowl of jello. "You've got to be kidding me," I thought to myself. "A Bigfoot? No way!" I was so utterly astonished that I did not scream. It was as if my tongue was tied. I had no idea that the gargantuan creature that carried me through the woods had been a Bigfoot. It hadn't even crossed my mind that that was the case. I had no idea that such idiosyncratic creatures actually existed here in North America, and seeing one up close and personal left me in no doubt that these things are definitely real. I guess everything that happened that day, from the moment I was abducted by the young man and then by the female Bigfoot, it was like something you'd see in a movie, but it was actually happening to me. It seemed that my predictably humdrum, rather ordinary day-to-day life, that I considered quite routine, had stepped up a notch or two and turned into something people would write stories about. Things like this didn't happen to ordinary people like me. There are no words in my vocabulary to describe the size of this Bigfoot. But I did realize at once she was female, and that was oddly comforting, as a female Bigfoot, I would hope, would be a lot less aggressive than her male counterpart. I could only hope and pray that she wasn't going to hurt me, but she didn't appear to have a predatory look on her. She looked more concerned than threatening. My heart was pounding vigorously in my chest, and was ticking away so fast I was surprised it remained beating. The female Bigfoot put a big hand on me to steady my jangled nerves, almost as if she sensed I was very disquieted, and was trying to calm me down. I guess to her I must have looked exactly like a pigeon that had been extracted from the cat's jaws. She patted my back. Her touch was both gentle and reassuring. In that moment I think I knew unequivocally, like you might know the sky is blue and that the grass is green, that this Bigfoot was not going to hurt me. But given how intimidating she looked, it was hard to believe that something so fearsome, so mighty, and so powerful could also be equally so gentle. I believe this Bigfoot had seen my dilemma, from which I had been fortuitously embroiled, rather like an insect entangled in a spider's web, unable to break free. She had taken me away from my abductor to keep me safe. The Bigfoot studied me for a while through her dark, questioning eyes. It was like she was trying to read my thoughts, and I honestly think she could. I was rather bewildered to discover how hugely intelligent and discerning she was, for I have never met a human being who could tune into me quite like she could. She spoke to me in a strange language that had to be ancient in its origins. The language itself was beautifully spoken, but the most bizarre thing of all is that I seemed to understand exactly what she was saying, as if the Bigfoot herself had a convoluted technique of mastering the power of telepathic communication so effortlessly easily, so that her words melted in my mind like butter on a bagel. Their meaning seemed to float into my mind like leaves across a large body of water, or like the answer to a crossword quiz that suddenly pops into your mind and you say, "Oh yes, I know the answer to that." It was so extraordinary, because had I known Bigfoots were real, I would never have known they would be capable of engaging in a full conversation with you. But they can, because my conversation with this Bigfoot flowed as seamlessly as a river. It was so fluid and so natural, I could have been talking to my own grandmother. It was the Bigfoot's dark-spirited eyes that arrested my attention, for in them I saw her magnanimously warm heart and the kindness that she had graciously bestowed on me. As when her words flowed fluidly out of her mouth, they were as soothing as an antiseptic cream you might rub on some grey skin. The creature spoke in such a way that the resonance and tone of her voice filled me with such a soothing calm that I could feel my eyelids suddenly growing heavy, almost as if someone is hypnotizing you and says, "Sleep." They click their fingers, and then in a flash you just drift off to La-La Land and don't even know anything about it. I was so tired. All I wanted to do was to crash. It was the kind of full, satisfied, rather contented feeling you get after a Thanksgiving meal, and after eating so much turkey, full of those feel-good tryptophan chemicals that flood your body with so many endorphins. I felt like that. All I wanted to do was to nap, so that I could digest everything that I'd eaten, although, of course, I hadn't eaten anything. My body was utterly exhausted, as if the urgency to sleep had become more like a demand than a choice. But it was a sweet, delicious sleep that my body was craving. The Bigfoot could see how fatigued I had become, and pointed towards the bed of leaves on the floor that looked even more tempting to lie on than my own bed at home, and when I sank back on those leaves, I was out like a light. "You are safe now. You need to rest. And when you've recovered, I'll take you back to the woods from whence you came," she had told me before I'd even laid down to sleep on those welcoming-looking leaves. "Kila tilato, kola patinata, tola sana." You want to be sure the young man chasing you is gone. You've had a shock. "Tila tola kolo, aki sanatswa." It had grieved my heart to see you looking so helpless and affrighted. Normally I don't interfere in people's business, but sometimes I can't help myself. I can't sit back and do nothing, can I, when I see a female being chased like that? My father always warned me never to interfere with your kind, but I've always been a bit of a rogue like that. I don't always do what I'm told, Nor do I always listen. My dad thinks your kind are more trouble than they're worth. He was once chased by a hunter, you know, ended up with 3 bullet wounds in his arms and 3 scars. He's still got the bullets and the scars. He wears his bullets around his neck with an eagle's feather. He wasn't angry with the hunter, of course. The man thought my father would hurt him, so he lashed out, I suspect, and ran away. Who are you? I asked. Kilatila kitoto, keneto. Kilotolopa, ikasa la kwashi. My name is Keneto. It means trusted one. So I guess it means you can trust me. You're not going to hurt me, are you? You're so very big. It was a silly question for me to ask, because if the Bigfoot intended to hurt me, she'd have done so already. Keneto seemed to be laughing at me. Kilatilato, pasani toi. Not everything big wants to hurt you. I may look intimidating, but I'm a pussycat, really. But looking scary does have its extreme advantages, let me tell you. I can frighten away anyone I wish, if I so desire. I've done it before when a man came into the woodgrove and was taking pop shots at the squirrels for no good reason at all. He had no intention of eating them. It was all a game to him. That's awful, I said. Well, everything that has life is precious, isn't it? Said the Bigfoot. It's against the rules to kill things just for the fun of it. If you're going to eat what you've killed, that's good. But if you kill for the hell of it, then you're accountable. Mother Nature is very discerning. She takes notes all the time. She observes and sees everything. Her eyes are wide open. I have been able to see your gentleness. I can also see in you that animals are treated well by you. I chose to rescue you because of this. It gets given back to you, you see. When you're a kind soul, the natural world appreciates your acts of kindness and gives them right back to you. What rules are you talking about? I asked. Kilatina tolopana, sila sikolochwa. The universal ones, of course. The ones written in every blade of grass, in every tree, in every leaf, in every piece of bark, in the clouds of the sky. You can't disrespect the natural world. If you do, she'll vomit you out in all manner of ways. Nature respects you only if you respect her. That's the way it works. So let's just say when the man was shooting for the hell of it, just to kill that squirrel for the sake of killing, he was at a very low vibration. Functioning at a low vibration, I mean. That's not acceptable to the natural world. The natural world concerns herself when we kill for no good reason. But if we do for overpopulation of one species over another, a need to eat or to clothe ourselves or something like that, then it's acceptable. But killing for fun, well, Mother Nature does not like that one bit. When I kill anything, it's only to eat. I always give thanks for it first. But this man enjoyed shooting randomly at anything that dared to move, and he got pleasure out of the kill, as if it was one big game. He didn't understand how the world works. When he saw me, he started trying to shoot at me as well. I think he thought I was going to kill him. I was growling at him, throwing my arms around at him fiercely, because I was hopping mad by his audacity. You should have seen his face. He was so frightened by me. He dropped his gun and ran away as fast as he could. I came tearing after him. He was screaming out in terror. He thought I was going to kill him, and I made sure he believed that, so that lowlife would never come here again, and he never did. Scared him off for good, I did. No regrets there. He deserved what he got. What happened after that I do not remember, because in all honesty, I lay back on those leaves and fell into a deep blissful sleep, the thoughts of my abductor long since behind me. I woke up a long while later, feeling disorientated and rather confused. I couldn't understand what I was doing in a cave, lying on a bed of leaves, until my memory snapped back into place, when I observed the female Bigfoot sitting on the rock beside my bed, watching over me very patiently, and when I sat up, I felt a lot more like myself, as if all the adrenaline in my system had been drained away. Kila tila tolono, saki shakwa. How are you feeling? The Bigfoot asked me. You have more colour in your cheeks. You look a lot better. Much better, I said, wiping the leaves off my person and rising to my feet. I need to be going. My mother's going to be worrying about me. Kila tila tono, pasi tatwa, kosono tolona basi. I'll get you back to the woods safely, so you can find your way back home. I need you to forget your encounter with me, so I'm going to erase your memory if I may. I'm sorry, but I need to do this. Please don't, Canetta, I said. I don't want to ever forget you. I don't want to forget you. If it wasn't for you, that man might have harmed me. I'm indebted to you for rescuing me. The Bigfoot thought about my words for a moment and then said, Kila tolo pana. I'll erase your memory for a couple of days, and I'll let it come back to you. But promise me you won't tell anyone about me. It's really important that you don't. Kitaki kwasa. But of course I won't tell anyone about you. Besides, even if I did, no one would believe me. They'd think I was delusional or making up a great story. It was later that day when I was found by the police wandering around the woods in a complete daze. I couldn't even remember my name, let alone my mother. But as the Bigfoot had faithfully promised, 2 days later my memory returned to me. I think my mother knew I was keeping stuff from her, but I didn't want to tell her about my encounter with the Bigfoot, as I had made a promise to Canetta not to tell anyone about her, and I intended to keep it. I was, of course, shaken up by my mere abduction at the hands of a young man, and rather like a dog returning to its vomit, I'm ashamed to say I ran back to Neville Mayer's, and we resumed our rather toxic relationship that I had been so glad to have freed myself from. But now his possessiveness, that I normally found insufferable, seemed almost welcoming, as I was gagging to feel safe and protected again. The police were unable to find out who the perpetrator was, or his reasons for abducting me, but now that I had been recovered safe and well, the investigation had ground to a halt. My mother had reacted very adversely to my abduction, as you would expect she would have done. She refused to leave our house in Seattle, but 2 months later I'm very glad to say she was back to her old self again, after courageously overcoming her fears. One day there was a knock at our front door. My mother led a young man into the living room, with an older man, who was clearly a pastor, for he wore a dog collar around his neck. I remember my skin went immediately clammy and cold, when I realized to my abject horror that this was the young man that had abducted me. What the hell was he doing in our house? "May we come in?" said the pastor. "My name's Pastor Philip Fletcher. This is my nephew Morris. May we come in for a little chat? It's very, very important." My mother nodded, looking rather bewildered and taken aback by the strangers at our door. I followed her to the living room, not saying a word, but every single part of me was inwardly screaming, "Get him out of here! He abducted me!" But for some reason my tongue was tied, while my heart throbbed violently in my chest. Finally I managed to blurt out, "Mum, that's the guy that abducted me! It was him!" I said, pointing at him. My mother's face grew like a stone. She stared in horror at Morris. "Is this true?" she said very calmly. "Were you the young man that abducted my daughter?" Morris looked like a dog that had just eaten the sofa and had been scolded by his owners. He hung his head in shame and began to tremble rather violently. Finally he stuttered rather lamely, "I'm sorry. It's not what you think. It's not at all what you think." "You're sorry? Is that all you can say?" said my mother. "Are you crazy? You ran off with my daughter, and when you did that, my whole world fell apart. I thought my girl was a goner. Do you know what it's like to wonder if your daughter is lying dead in a ditch somewhere, with her neck slit, after having been raped and violently murdered? Those 8 hours of my life, when my daughter went missing, were the most agonizing hours. Every second that went by, it was a lifetime to me. I was a tormented soul that is still recovering from the aftershocks of that harrowing experience. And you come in here as if nothing happened at all." My mother's indignant eyes burned furiously as she stared angrily at Morris with a murderous glare that left nothing to the imagination. "Why would you do this to my daughter? Are you sick in the head or something? I need to call the police at once. You can explain to them why you abducted my girl. I think they'll be very interested to have a chat with you, young man.
And frankly, I hope they lock you up in prison and throw away the key, so that you never see the light of day again. You deserve that." "You're right, ma'am. I deserve that," said Morris. "Even though I never intended to harm your daughter. I shouldn't have grabbed her the way I did. I caused her quite a scare, and I didn't mean to do that. Well, I did, but I didn't." "Too right, you... Oh, I don't know what to say. I can't believe you've had the audacity to come into my house like this. Who do you think you are? How dare you abduct my daughter?" "Calm down, ma'am. There is no point in getting overexcited over this," said the pastor. "I know you're angry, and rightly so. Any mother in your predicament would feel exactly the same way. But before you go to the policeman, I urge you to hear my nephew out. Not only does he want to apologize to your daughter for what happened on that day, but he wants to explain himself so you fully understand why he did what he did. Not that he has any excuse for his bad behavior. He feels great remorse and regret that he abducted your daughter. It was not something he willingly wanted to do, and he did not do it with an easy heart. I can assure you I have known my nephew Morris all my life. He is one of the kindest, most gentle souls you could ever hope to meet. Why he agreed to go through with this crazy plan, God only knows. But I guess he felt extremely beholden to his good friend. Sometimes teenagers don't always think straight. After the event, he was in such turmoil and such distress he came to see me, in quite the state, asking me for forgiveness, which I cannot give. Only God can do that. I do believe my nephew was unfairly coerced into doing this by a manipulative young man. I might add, I think what he has to tell you will find most revelatory. He is willing to confess to the police everything that happened. But it was my idea we came to see you both first, so that you can call all the shots and decide what needs to be done. My nephew is grievously upset about having grabbed your daughter in the way he did. But it is not what you think. And right now, ma'am, you would be well advised to listen to Morris's story. But once you have heard him out, feel free to press charges if you so wish." "Fair enough," said my mother. "We'll hear your nephew out. But in my book there are no excuses that can forgive his outrageous behavior. I'm sorry, but there are none." It was then that Morris began to tell us his story, about how my boyfriend Neville had saved his life when he was 10 years old. How Neville had called in a favour from him. He had asked Morris to abduct me, but then let me escape, thinking I had outsmarted him. The whole idea was to make me so affrighted, so desperately insecure in my own life. I would go running back to my ex-boyfriend for cover, which ironically is exactly what I had done. It had been my boyfriend Neville that had orchestrated this awful, insidious plan, and Morris had just been a pawn to him that he had exploited, manipulated and used to do his bidding. The long and the short of this rather baffling story is that I forgave Morris at once, as did my mother. It was the right thing to do. He had come to our house, after all, with an honest and open heart, laying out his guilt before us like a dinner buffet on a table, but not a nice one at that. Indeed, his guilt and shame had been so profound, he had sought out the seasoned advice of his sagacious uncle, who was a man of the cloth, and was ready to confess to his part that he had played in this atrocious scandal. He assured me passionately that he would never have hurt a hair on my head, and had only gone through with this nonsensical plan because Neville had laid on the pressure thickly, and he had been unable to refuse his friend. He had agreed to make me believe that he was a nasty predator, and that my life had been in perilous danger. I was to understand that Neville had been pleased that the plan had gone so swimmingly. He'd said to Morris, "Well done, bro. I told you you could do it. You saved my life, like I saved yours all those years ago. I've got my girl back. She realizes now how much she needs me. She's finally woken up, I'm glad to say." I absolutely believed Morris's account, 1000%. He was remorseful, chastened, shamefaced and contrite.
I know firsthand what a masterful manipulator and cunningly persuasive puppet master Neville can actually be. It only served to highlight that my boyfriend would literally go to the ends of the earth and back to get exactly what he wanted, to meet his Machiavellian end, and to get me ensnared in a relationship with him. But now he had failed catastrophically. As far as I was concerned, there was absolutely no point in going to the police about any of this. Furthermore, I didn't want them involved. I could see that Morris had suffered enough from the burden of the guilt he'd been carrying around. Furthermore, he was quite happy to confess his part in this duplicitous scheme to the police, but I told him that it would not be necessary. All was forgiven and forgotten. How could I possibly hold a grudge against someone who had meant me no harm, but was only carrying out my boyfriend's guileful wishes because he felt indebted to do so, and I could understand that. He looked rather stupefied when I told him that I wasn't going to the police, and that I fully accepted his apology for what he'd done.
But don't you want to go to the police? After what I did? You would be in your right to do so. I wouldn't blame you if you did.
This isn't your fault, Morris. You were manipulated by Neville. You were a pawn in his game. I know exactly what he's like. In truth, he's the perpetrator here.
My thoughts exactly, said the pastor. I told my nephew that he needed to come clean with you, and it was the best thing he did. It's a load off my chest, admitted Morris. I can't believe I was such an idiot to agree to this. We all do things we regret, son, said the pastor, slapping his nephew on the back. Morris told us he'd heard a female voice in his head telling him to get away from me and to leave me well alone, so he had run back to his car riddled with guilt, wishing to God that he hadn't agreed to do any of this for Neville. I've never believed in guardian angels, he joked, but yours literally spoke to me in my head, telling me to get the hell away.
No, I thought. You don't know the half of it. The voice you heard in your head did not belong to an angel. It belonged to the female Bigfoot. But in a way you can describe her as an angel, I suppose. Looking back, I have no regrets that I never went to the police. Morris was a good person who agreed to do something rather foolish. But he did me a big favour. He showed me what a buffoon Neville was. I contacted Neville and told him I never wanted to see him again, and that I knew exactly what he'd done, and if he came near me again, I would call the police and file a restraining order against him. Thankfully, I never did see him again. Looking back on that experience, I have absolutely no regrets, as meeting Kenita that day was an encounter that would never have touched my life if I had not been flung into such a set of very bizarre circumstances that has made me view the world through a very different lens. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.